Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Wade Harkness, and I spent 11 years as a backcountry ranger in the Appalachian mountain range, specifically working out of a small ranger station near the Tennessee-North Carolina border. I'm sharing this story because, after listening to your other park ranger episodes, I realized that what happened to me back in October of 2016 fits right in with the kind of unexplainable incidents you cover on this channel. Before I get into what happened, I need to give you some context about the area I was working in. The section of the Appalachian Trail I was responsible for covered roughly 43 miles of some of the most isolated ridgeline terrain in the eastern United States. We're talking about elevation changes of over 3,000 feet, narrow paths carved into mountainsides, and sections where if you slip and fall, they might not find your body for weeks. During peak hiking season, we'd see maybe 15 to 20 through hikers per week. During the off-season, particularly late October when this incident occurred, you could go days without seeing another human being. The terrain itself is unforgiving in ways that most people don't understand until they've actually spent time out there. The ridge trails are exposed, meaning when the weather turns, you're completely vulnerable to whatever nature throws at you. The valleys between the ridges are so densely forested that even in broad daylight, it's dark enough down there to need a flashlight. And the sound carries in strange ways because of how the valleys echo. You'll hear something that sounds like it's right behind you, only to realize it's actually coming from half a mile away in a completely different direction. I'm telling you all this because understanding the environment is crucial to understanding why what happened was so disturbing. This wasn't some manicured state park with clearly marked trails and visitor centers every few miles. This was genuine wilderness, the kind where if something goes wrong, you're on your own until help can reach you, which could be hours or even days depending on the weather and your exact location. Now, let me tell you about Sadie Lark. Sadie was a seasonal ranger who'd been brought on for the fall season. She was in her mid-20s, fresh out of college with a degree in environmental science, and she had that enthusiasm that new rangers always have before the job shows them the darker side of wilderness management. We'd been working together for about 6 weeks when the incident happened, and I'd grown to respect her. She was smart, she followed protocol, and she wasn't afraid of hard work or long hours in rough conditions. On October 23, 2016, we received a report from the Trail Management Office that a solo hiker named Marcus Weatherly had failed to check in at the scheduled shelter. Marcus was a 58-year-old experienced hiker from Virginia who'd been doing a section hike of the AT. He'd registered his itinerary with the trail office, which is standard procedure, and according to his plan, he should have reached the Bald Mountain Shelter by 6 p.m. on October 22nd. When he didn't show up and didn't call in to report a delay, the office contacted us at 9 a.m. the following morning. This kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. Hikers get delayed, they decide to camp at a different spot, they take a side trail without updating their itinerary. 9 times out of 10, we find them perfectly fine, maybe a little embarrassed about causing a fuss. But you always have to take it seriously because that 10th time, someone's hurt, lost, or worse. Sadie and I geared up and headed out around 10:30 a.m. The weather was overcast but stable, temperature in the low 50s, no rain in the forecast. We started at the last confirmed sighting location, which was a trail junction about 8 miles south of Bald Mountain Shelter. Another hiker had reported seeing Marcus there around 2 p.m. on the 22nd, which meant he should have easily made it to the shelter by his planned arrival time. The protocol in these situations is straightforward. You follow the expected route, looking for any sign of the missing person, checking likely camping spots, and calling out regularly. We made good time for the first few miles, stopping at each potential camping area to look for evidence that someone had stayed there recently. Nothing. No disturbed ground, no fire rings, no trash, no footprints off the main trail. It was around 1 p.m. when things started feeling off. We were about 4 miles from the shelter, hiking along a particularly narrow section of ridge trail called Devil's Backbone. The path here is maybe 2 feet wide in places, with a steep drop-off on the eastern side that falls away into a heavily forested valley. The western side isn't quite as dramatic, but it's still a significant slope covered in loose rocks and dense laurel thickets. Sadie was leading at that point, and I saw her stop abruptly about 20 yards ahead of me. She was crouched down, examining something on the trail. When I caught up to her, she pointed at the ground without saying anything. Footprints. Fresh ones, clearly defined in a patch of soft dirt that had probably been muddy from rain a day or two earlier but had since partially dried. The tread pattern was consistent with modern hiking boots, and based on the size and depth, they belonged to a man probably between 170 and 200 pounds. Marcus Weatherly's description put him at 6 feet tall, 185 pounds. "These look right," Sadie said, pulling out her radio to report the finding. But I was already looking past the first set of prints, following the trail with my eyes, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. About 15 feet ahead, the footprints changed direction. Not like he'd turned around, which would show a pivot point or overlapping prints. These prints just suddenly pointed the opposite direction, as if he'd been walking backward. But that wasn't the strangest part. The stride length was exactly the same. The depth was exactly the same. Everything about them suggested a normal walking pace, except they were pointing the wrong way. I've seen a lot of strange things on trails over the years. I've seen prints from people who were clearly injured and dragging one leg. I've seen prints from people who were running. I've seen prints where someone had obviously fallen and scrambled around before getting back up, but I'd never seen anything quite like this. "Sadie," I said, keeping my voice calm, "come look at this." She stood up and walked over to where I was crouching. I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to something that looked like concern. "Is he walking backward?" she asked. "That's what it looks like. Why would anyone walk backward on a narrow ridge trail?" It was a good question, and I didn't have a good answer. The rational explanations ran through my head. Maybe he'd dropped something and was retracing his steps without turning around. Maybe he'd seen something behind him and was backing away from it. Maybe he was disoriented. But none of those explanations really made sense. If you drop something on a trail, you turn around and go back for it. If you're backing away from something, you don't maintain a steady, even pace. And if you're disoriented enough to walk backward for an extended distance, you're probably not maintaining perfect stride length and depth. We followed the backward-facing prints for about 40 yards. They never wavered, never showed any sign of stumbling or hesitation. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they stopped. Not stopped like he'd changed direction again, they just ended. The trail continued ahead, but there were no more prints, forward or backward. The ground from that point on was a mixture of exposed rock and hard-packed dirt that wouldn't hold clear prints, which wasn't unusual for this section of trail. But the abrupt ending of the backward prints in soft dirt, right before the ground changed to hard surface, felt somehow deliberate, like someone had planned it that way. "Radio this in," I told Sadie. "I'm going to scout ahead." While she made the report to the ranger station, I walked slowly forward, scanning the ground for any trace of where Marcus might have gone. The ridge trail continued ahead for another half-mile before starting a gradual descent toward the shelter. On both sides of the trail, the terrain was difficult but not impossible to traverse. If he'd gone off trail for some reason, there should be some indication. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, scuff marks on rocks. Nothing. I expanded my search pattern, moving back and forth across the trail, checking the edges carefully. And that's when I found the first piece of what I initially thought was trash, caught in the brush about 10 feet downslope on the eastern side. It was a page from a small notebook, the kind hikers use to journal or track their mileage. The paper was slightly damp from overnight humidity, but still legible. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. The trail looks different after dark. I don't recognize landmarks I passed this morning. Path keeps curving right when it should curve left. Have I been walking in circles? Check map. Headlamp batteries dying. The entry wasn't dated, but the ink appeared fresh. I carefully folded the page and put it in my pack, then continued searching the immediate area. 15 feet further down the slope, partially hidden under a rhododendron bush, I found the notebook itself. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked it up. The cover was green with water damage around the edges, and there was a name written on the inside cover. Marcus Weatherly. I should have called for Sadie right then, but something made me open the notebook and start reading. The last few entries were what got to me. October 21st, 4:47 p.m. Made good time today. Should reach Bald Madden Shelter tomorrow afternoon. Weather holding. Legs feeling strong. Saw a couple of southbound through hikers who said the next section is beautiful. October 22nd, 7:23 a.m. Up early. Coffee tastes better at 5,000 feet. Clear skies. Starting hike by 8. October 22nd, 2:15 p.m. Stopped at Trail Junction for lunch. Met a young couple headed the other way. They asked if I'd seen the night hikers. Said there are people who only hike after sunset. Thought they were joking. October 22nd, 6:45 p.m. Should have reached shelter by now. GPS says I'm still 3 miles away, but I feel like I've been walking forever. Path doesn't look right in the fading light. Decided to push on instead of camping. Want to reach shelter. October 22nd, 9:30 p.m. Headlamp dying. This isn't the same trail. I've passed the same boulder 3 times. The path keeps doubling back on itself. I'm not lost. I know this trail, but something's wrong with it. October 22nd, 11:47 p.m. Heard footsteps behind me. Turned around. Nothing there. Turned back forward. Heard them again. Closer. Walking in exactly the same rhythm as my own steps. Started walking faster. The footsteps matched my pace exactly. October 23rd, 2:33 a.m. Can't tell if I'm going uphill or downhill anymore. Everything is spinning. No, not spinning, reversing. Like someone is playing a video backward. My own footprints ahead of me instead of behind me. That's impossible. I laid down my own trail. Tracks should be behind me. October 23rd, 4:15 a.m. If you find this, the path at night is not the path during day. Don't try to hike out after dark. Whatever is walking behind you. The entry ended mid-sentence. The page was torn at the bottom, as if someone had ripped the rest away in a hurry. I felt cold despite my layers. The temperature hadn't dropped, but I suddenly felt like I was standing in a freezer. "Wade!" Sadie's voice carried down from the trail. Ranger Station wants us to establish a proper search perimeter. They're sending 2 more rangers, ETA about 3 hours. I climbed back up to the trail, holding the notebook. When Sadie saw my face, her expression immediately shifted. "What did you find?" I handed her the notebook, watching as she read the last few entries. The color drained from her face. This is impossible," she said quietly. "He's describing his own footprints being ahead of him. That doesn't make sense." "Read it again," I said. "He says his footprints are ahead of him, not behind him. Like the trail he already walked is in front of him instead of behind." That would mean he was seeing the trail reversed, walking forward, but somehow seeing his own past path ahead of him instead of behind him. We stood there in silence for a moment. A cold wind picked up along the ridge, carrying the smell of distant rain. The sky had darkened considerably in the last hour, and I realized we probably only had another 3 or 4 hours of good daylight left. "We need to find him," Sadie said. "If he's been out here since last night, disoriented, possibly injured, I know. Standard search protocol would have us wait for backup and establish a proper grid search, but something about those journal entries made me think we didn't have time to wait. Marcus had been experiencing some kind of severe psychological episode, possibly brought on by exhaustion, dehydration, or exposure. People in that state can do dangerous things. They can walk off cliffs. They can hypothermic and freeze to death even in moderate temperatures. They can curl up somewhere hidden and never be found. I made the decision that still haunts me. We go forward, I said. But we stay together. No splitting up, no matter what. And if we don't find him by the time those other rangers arrive, we combine forces and do this properly." Sadie nodded, and we started hiking again, both of us calling out Marcus's name every few minutes. The trail continued along the ridge for another 1/4 mile before beginning a steep descent. This was the section that should lead directly to Bald Mountain Shelter. We were about halfway down when Sadie grabbed my arm and pointed off the trail to the north. There, barely visible through the trees about 30 yards away, was a small orange tent. It was set up in a completely illogical location, on a steep slope, surrounded by rhododendrons, nowhere near any water source, and definitely not on any established camping site. But it was definitely someone's tent, and the orange color matched the description Marcus had given when he'd registered his itinerary. "Marcus," I called out. "Marcus Weatherly. It's the park rangers. We're here to help." No response. We approached carefully, following proper protocol for approaching an unresponsive hiker's campsite. The tent flap was partially open, moving slightly in the wind. As we got closer, I could see that the entire setup was wrong. The tent stakes were driven in at odd angles. The rainfly was twisted and tangled, and there were items scattered around the site. A cooking pot, a water bottle, a single hiking boot. "Marcus, we're coming in," I called out again. Still no response. I knelt down and pulled the tent flap fully open. The tent was empty, but inside, spread across the floor, were dozens of pages torn from a notebook. Every single one was covered in handwriting, and every single one said the same thing, repeated over and over. "Don't walk at night. Don't walk at night. Don't walk at night. Don't walk at night." Some pages had it written hundreds of times in tiny script. Others had it written in huge letters that took up the entire page. The handwriting devolved from controlled to frantic to barely legible scrawls. In the center of all the papers was Marcus Weatherly's backpack, his sleeping bag still rolled up on top of it, and his remaining hiking boot. But Marcus himself was gone. Sadie was standing behind me, breathing hard. "Wade, what the hell is this?" I was about to answer when I heard it. Footsteps. They were coming from upslope, back the way we'd come. Steady, even footsteps, getting closer. My first thought was relief. Marcus had wandered away from his tent and was coming back. But then I realized something that made my blood run cold. We were on a steep slope. Those footsteps should have sounded like someone struggling uphill, breathing hard, scuffing against loose dirt and rocks. These footsteps sounded like someone walking on flat ground. Easy, casual, and they were getting closer with impossible speed. "Someone's coming," Sadie whispered. "Get behind the tent," I said quietly. "Now." We moved quickly, positioning ourselves so we could see upslope but had some cover. My hand went to the radio on my belt, ready to call for immediate backup. The footsteps were getting louder. I could hear branches breaking, leaves rustling, but I couldn't see anyone. Then the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound had been. We waited, barely breathing, watching the slope above us. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Wade Harkness. Identify yourself." No answer. Just the wind moving through the trees and the distant sound of a woodpecker somewhere down in the valley. I was about to call out again when Sadie grabbed my shoulder and pointed. There, about 20 feet upslope, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, I could see something moving. Not walking, just swaying slightly, like someone was standing there trying to stay balanced on the steep slope. "Marcus?" I called out. "Is that you?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move except for that slight swaying motion. I took a step forward, and Sadie immediately moved with me, staying close. We advanced slowly up the slope, keeping our eyes on the figure behind the tree. As we got closer, I could make out more details. It was definitely a person, wearing dark clothing, standing completely still except for that subtle sway. But something about the posture was wrong. The shoulders were too hunched, the head tilted at an odd angle, and the person seemed to be facing away from us, looking downslope. "Sir, we're park rangers," I said, using my most calm and professional voice. "We're here to help. Are you Marcus Weatherly?" Still no response. We were maybe 10 feet away now, close enough that I should have been able to hear breathing or see more details of the person's clothing, but it was like they were somehow blurred, out of focus despite being right in front of us. I reached out to touch the person's shoulder. My hand went right through them. Not through them like they were a ghost. The figure was still there, still visible. But my hand passed through the space where their shoulder should have been without encountering any resistance, like I was reaching through empty air. The figure didn't react to my attempt to touch them, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge us at all. "What the hell?" Sadie started to say, but I cut her off. "Back to the tent. Now." We retreated quickly, and the moment we were back at Marcus's campsite, the figure behind the tree began to move, not turning toward us or walking down the slope. Instead, it started walking backward up the slope, still facing away from us, moving with that same steady, impossible gait that didn't match the terrain. We watched it move backward through the trees until it disappeared from view. The footsteps continued for another minute or so, then stopped. Sadie was shaking. "Wade, what was that?" "I don't know." That couldn't have been, "I know." She pulled out her radio with trembling hands and called back to the station. "Ranger Station, this is Lark. We found Weatherly's campsite. Tent is set up approximately 30 yards north of the trail, about halfway down to Bald Mountain Shelter. But Weatherly is not here. We need immediate backup and—" She paused, looking at me. I took the radio. "This is Harkness. Be advised, we have a situation here that doesn't fit standard search protocol. Requesting that the search team bring full medical and psychological support. Possible severe disorientation or altered mental state." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that, Harkness. Backup team is 40 minutes out. Are you and Lark in immediate danger?" I looked at Sadie, then back up the slope where we'd seen the figure. "Uncertain. We're securing the campsite and establishing a perimeter. Copy. Maintain position and regular radio contact every 15 minutes. After I signed off, Sadie and I began documenting the campsite, taking photos and making notes. Standard procedure, something familiar to hold on to while our minds tried to process what we'd just seen. That's when I noticed the pattern. All of those torn notebook pages scattered inside the tent. All those repetitions of "don't walk at night." They weren't random. When you looked at them from above, from outside the tent looking in, they formed a spiral pattern, with the most frantic, least legible pages in the center and the more controlled pages radiating outward. And in the very center of that spiral, written in letters so small I almost missed them, was a final message. I saw myself walking backward through my own trail. I am behind me and ahead of me. The path only goes forward, but I only go back. Tell my daughter I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to make it to daylight. The backup team arrived 38 minutes later. 2 more rangers, Mitchell and Torres, along with a search and rescue coordinator named Brandt, who'd driven up from the district office. We briefed them on everything we'd found: the backward footprints, the journal entries, the campsite, the figure we'd seen in the trees. I watched their faces as we explained. Mitchell kept his expression neutral, but I caught him and Torres exchanging glances when I described the figure that we couldn't physically touch. Brandt listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions about timing and exact locations. "And you're certain your hand passed through the person?" Brandt asked. "Completely certain," I said. "Could it have been a shadow? A trick of the light through the trees? At 2 p.m. on an overcast day?" I shook my head. Shadows don't walk backward uphill maintaining perfect posture. Brandt nodded slowly. "Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We establish a proper grid search centered on this campsite. We work in pairs. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We have maybe 3 hours of decent daylight left, and I want to cover as much ground as possible in that time." He assigned search sectors. Mitchell and Torres would work east along the ridge. Sadie and I would continue down toward Bald Mountain Shelter, and Brandt would search north into the valley. Everyone had radios, everyone had GPS trackers, and we were to maintain contact every 10 minutes. "One more thing," Brandt said, looking at each of us in turn. "I don't care what you see out there. I don't care what you hear. Nobody investigates anything alone. You see something strange, you radio it in and wait for backup. Understood?" We all confirmed understanding, and the team split up. Sadie and I continued down the trail toward the shelter. The path here descended steeply through a series of switchbacks, and under normal circumstances it would have been a pleasant hike. The forest was beautiful, even in late October with most of the leaves gone. But after what we'd seen at Marcus's campsite, every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound in the underbrush made us jump. We were maybe half a mile from the shelter when Sadie stopped abruptly. "Wade, look at this." She was pointing at the ground just off the trail. More footprints, but these were different. These showed someone running, stumbling, falling. The pattern was chaotic. Here, a deep impact where someone had landed hard. There, a long scuff where a boot had dragged. Everywhere, the signs of someone in complete panic. We followed the prints carefully. They led off the trail and into the forest, weaving between trees, sometimes doubling back, sometimes running in a straight line before abruptly changing direction. It was the trail of someone who was completely disoriented, or being chased, or both. The prints ended at a small clearing maybe 50 yards off the main trail, and in the center of that clearing was Marcus Weatherly. He was sitting with his back against a large boulder, his legs stretched out in front of him, his head tilted back against the stone. One boot on, one boot missing, just like we'd seen at his campsite. His eyes were closed, and for a terrible moment I thought we were too late. Then his eyes opened. "Don't come any closer," he said. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "They're still here." I stopped immediately, holding out an arm to keep Sadie from advancing. "Marcus, I'm Wade Harkness, Park Ranger. This is Ranger Lark. We're here to help you. You're safe now." He laughed, but it was a terrible sound, more like a sob. "Safe? You think I'm safe? You think you're safe?" "Can you tell us what happened?" Sadie asked gently. We found your journal. We found your campsite. My campsite, he repeated, and laughed again. Which one? I've made 3 campsites. Or I made 1 campsite 3 times. I can't tell anymore. I exchanged a look with Sadie, then slowly approached Marcus, keeping my movements calm and non-threatening. As I got closer, I could see he was in bad shape. His face was scratched, his hands were bleeding, and his clothing was torn in several places. But the worst part was his eyes. They had that 1,000-yard stare you see in people who've experienced severe trauma. Marcus, I need you to stay calm and talk to me. When did you last eat or drink anything? This morning, or yesterday morning, or tomorrow morning? He shook his head violently. Time doesn't work right here, not after dark. Okay, let's start simple. Today is October 23rd. Do you remember leaving the trail junction on October 22nd? He nodded. I remember starting to hike toward the shelter. I remember it getting dark. I remember. He trailed off, staring at something over my shoulder. I fought the urge to turn around. What do you remember, Marcus? I remember hearing footsteps behind me. I thought it was another hiker, someone else making a late push to the shelter. I called out to them. They didn't answer, but they kept walking, matching my pace exactly. So you kept hiking? I couldn't stop. Every time I stopped, the footsteps stopped. The second I started walking again, they started. Always the same distance behind me. Always the exact same rhythm. Sadie had pulled out her radio to call in our position and request medical evacuation, but Marcus's next words made her freeze. I finally worked up the courage to turn around and look. You know what I saw? What did you see, Marcus? Myself. I saw myself walking toward me, but it was wrong. I was walking backward, but making forward progress. My face was... He stopped, struggling with the words. My face was turned toward me, but the rest of my body was facing away, and my expression was blank. Empty. Like nobody was home. The temperature seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Sadie's hand was shaking as she raised the radio. I ran, Marcus continued. I ran off the trail, through the forest. Didn't care about branches or rocks or anything. I just had to get away from it, from me, from whatever that thing was wearing my face. How long ago was this? I asked, sad. I don't know, hours, days? I've tried to hike out 3 times. Every time I think I'm making progress, I end up back at the same boulder. This boulder. I've been going in circles. That's not possible, Marcus. The terrain... I know what's possible, he shouted. Then immediately collapsed into himself, sobbing. I know what should be possible. I know how trails work. I know how directions work. But something is wrong with this section of mountain. The path doesn't lead forward anymore. It leads back. It leads into itself. Sadie finally got through on the radio, requesting immediate medical evacuation with precise GPS coordinates. The response came back that they could have a helicopter here within 40 minutes if weather permitted, or a ground team within 2 hours. Tell them to hurry, Sadie said into the radio. We have 1 male, late 50s, signs of severe exhaustion and possible psychological trauma. He's ambulatory but disoriented. While she handled the logistics, I sat down next to Marcus, not too close, giving him space. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. Did you see anything else out here? Anything besides the figure that looked like you? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I saw footprints. Not mine. Not anyone's I recognized. They were barefoot, but the toes were too long, wrong. And they were walking the same direction as me, but every 4th or 5th print was reversed, like one foot was facing forward and one was facing backward. Where did you see these prints? Everywhere. They crisscrossed my own trail. Sometimes they followed me, sometimes they led away, but they were always there, just at the edge of my flashlight beam. He looked up at me suddenly. You believe me, don't you? You don't think I'm crazy? Before I could answer, Mitchell's voice came over the radio, urgent and strained. All units, this is Mitchell. Torres and I are at coordinates. He rattled off numbers that placed them about a quarter-mile east of our position. We've found something you need to see, some kind of... Christ, I don't even know how to describe it. Multiple sets of footprints, all converging on a single point, then nothing. Just like they all stopped existing at the same spot. Brandt's voice came through. Mitchell, I'm closest to your position. Maintain observation, but don't approach. I'm approximately 10 minutes from you. Copy that. Mitchell responded. But boss, there's something else. I can hear something in the valley below us. It sounds like someone walking. But it's wrong. The footsteps are too regular, too perfect, and they're getting louder. My radio was clipped to my belt, volume turned up so everyone could hear the conversation. Marcus had stopped crying and was listening intently, his face going pale. That's them, he whispered. That's what I heard. They're not right. The footsteps aren't right. Marcus, you need to get out of here before dark, all of you. Once the sun goes down, the trail changes. The rules change. You won't be able to find your way out. Torres's voice joined the radio conversation. We can see movement down in the valley. Can't make out what it is, but it's moving parallel to us, matching our position. All units, Brandt said, and I could hear the tension in his voice. New orders. We're aborting the search. Everyone converge on Harkness and Lark's position. We extract Weatherly, and we get off this mountain, now. Copy, Mitchell responded. Copy, I said. I helped Marcus to his feet. He was shaky but able to walk. Sadie took point, I supported Marcus in the middle, and we started making our way back toward the main trail. The helicopter ETA was still 35 minutes away, but we couldn't wait here. Not with whatever Torres had seen down in the valley. We'd made it maybe 20 yards when Marcus grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Stop, he hissed. Don't move. Marcus, we need to keep... Look at the ground. I looked down. There, crossing our path at a perpendicular angle, was a line of footprints. They were barefoot prints just like Marcus had described. But he was right. Something was horribly wrong with them. The toes were elongated, almost finger-like, and every fourth print was reversed, the toes pointing backward while the heel pointed forward. The prints were fresh, wet, like someone had just walked through here moments before. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that as we stood there, frozen, another print appeared in the soft dirt right in front of us. Then another, then another. We were watching something invisible walk past us, leaving tracks as it went. The footsteps made no sound. Sadie had her hand over her mouth, and I could see she was fighting not to scream. I tightened my grip on Marcus, and slowly, carefully, we stepped over the line of invisible tracks and continued toward the trail. Behind us, the footsteps stopped appearing. But I had the overwhelming sensation that whatever was making them had turned around and was now facing our direction, watching us leave. We made it back to the main trail and started moving as quickly as Marcus's condition would allow. My radio crackled, Brandt's voice. Harkness, what's your status? We're on the main trail heading toward Bald Mountain Shelter. Weatherly is with us, mobile but needs immediate medical attention. Copy. I'm converging on your position. ETA 8 minutes. Mitchell and Torres are coming from the other direction. ETA 10 minutes. Understood. Be advised, we just encountered some kind of anomaly. Footprints appearing spontaneously. Source unknown. There was a pause. Say again, Harkness? We observed tracks being made by something we couldn't see, moving perpendicular to our position. Another pause, longer this time. Copy that. Everyone maintain radio contact and keep moving. I don't care what you see or hear. We get to the shelter, we get Weatherly on that helicopter, and we get off this mountain. We pushed forward, Marcus practically hanging off my shoulder. The trail was getting darker despite it being barely 3 p.m. The cloud cover had thickened, and the dense forest canopy blocked most of the remaining light. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The trail markers, the white blazes painted on trees every few hundred yards to mark the path, were appearing on the wrong trees. I'd hiked this section dozens of times. I knew exactly where every marker should be, but now they were showing up on trees to the left of the path instead of the right. On trees that were too small to have existed when the trail was marked. On trees that shouldn't have markers at all. "Sadie," I said quietly, "don't react, just listen. Are the trail markers where they should be?" She'd been hiking these trails for months. She knew what I was asking. I saw her eyes move, tracking the white blazes without moving her head. "No," she whispered. "They're wrong. They're all wrong." Marcus heard us and laughed that terrible laugh again. "I tried to tell you, the trail changes, the forest changes. After dark, nothing is where it should be." "It's not dark yet," Sadie said, but her voice was shaking. "Doesn't matter. It's starting. Can't you feel it? The way the air gets heavy, the way sounds stop carrying, right?" He was right. I'd been so focused on getting him to safety that I hadn't noticed the change in atmosphere. But now that he mentioned it, I could feel it. The air did feel heavy, oppressive, and sounds were behaving strangely. My own footsteps seemed to echo from the wrong direction, and when Sadie spoke, her voice seemed to come from slightly behind her actual position. The radio crackled again. "Harkness, it's Mitchell. We're approaching your position from the east. Should have visual contact in about 2 minutes. Copy, Mitchell. I stopped mid-sentence. Ahead of us on the trail, maybe 40 yards away, I could see 2 figures in ranger uniforms walking toward us. Mitchell and Torres. They'd made better time than expected, but something was wrong. They were walking normally, facing toward us, making steady forward progress. But their shadows on the trail were moving in the opposite direction, sliding backward across the dirt like they were walking the wrong way. "Sadie," I said, "look at their shadows." She saw it immediately and grabbed my arm. "That's not possible." I raised my radio. "Mitchell, is that you about 40 yards ahead of us on the trail?" "Negative, Harkness. We're still in the forest, paralleling the trail about 15 yards to the north. We don't have visual on you yet." The 2 figures on the trail kept walking toward us, getting closer. Their faces became more distinct, and I felt my stomach lurch. They did look like Mitchell and Torres, but the resemblance was wrong, like a photograph that had been slightly distorted. The proportions were off by fractions, eyes a bit too far apart, mouths a bit too wide. The whole face somehow stretched in ways that shouldn't be possible on a human skull. "Run," Marcus whispered. "Run now." I didn't argue. We turned and started running back the way we'd come, Marcus stumbling between us but finding strength in his panic. Behind us, I could hear footsteps on the trail. The not Mitchell and not Torres following us, but their footsteps sounded wrong, too crisp, too perfectly timed. "Mitchell!" I shouted into the radio while running. "Get to the clearing where Weatherly's tent was set up. Meet us there." "Copy. On our way." We crashed through the underbrush, abandoning the trail entirely, moving as fast as the terrain would allow. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots tried to trip us, but we kept moving. Behind us, those 2 perfect footsteps continued. never getting closer but never falling behind either. We burst into the clearing where Marcus's tent still stood. Seconds later, Mitchell and Torres emerged from the tree line to the north. The real Mitchell and Torres, I could tell by their expressions of genuine confusion and concern. "What happened?" Mitchell asked, but before I could answer, Brandt's voice came over the radio. "All units, helicopter is inbound. ETA 12 minutes. I'm at Bald Mountain Shelter setting up the landing zone. You need to get Weatherly here now." "We've got a problem, boss," I said into the radio. "There's something on the trail between us and the shelter. Multiple somethings. I struggled for words. "They're mimicking us, imperfectly." "Explain." Brandt's voice was tight. "We saw figures that looked like Mitchell and Torres, but they weren't. They were wrong. And they're following us." A long pause. "How far are you from the shelter?" I checked my GPS. "About 3/4 of a mile." "Can you make it through the forest, avoiding the trail entirely?" I looked at the terrain, mentally mapping a route. It would be rough going, especially with Marcus barely able to walk. But if those things were on the trail... Yes, it'll take longer and it'll be hard on Weatherly, but we can do it. Then do it. Avoid the trail. I'm setting flares along the shelter perimeter to guide you in. And people, whatever you do, don't engage with anything you see that doesn't respond to radio contact. If I can't confirm it's really you over the radio, I'm assuming it's not you. Copy that. We started moving through the forest, 5 rangers and 1 terrified hiker, maintaining a tight formation. Torres led with the GPS, I supported Marcus, Mitchell covered our rear, Sadie kept visual contact with the trail to our right, and Brandt's voice on the radio guided us toward the shelter. The forest got darker. Not gradually, like normal sunset, but in sudden waves, like someone was dimming lights. One moment we'd have enough light to see clearly, the next we'd be in deep twilight, then back to dim daylight. It was disorienting, and I found myself losing track of how long we'd been moving. "Torres, how far?" I asked. "GPS says 400 yards, but..." He stopped walking. "But what?" The GPS location keeps jumping. 1 second it says we're 400 yards away, the next it says we're 600 yards away. The coordinates aren't stable. Marcus pulled on my arm. "It's happening. The forest is changing. We need to move faster." "We're moving as fast as we can with..." "No!" he shouted. "You don't understand. Once it fully changes, once the night version locks in, we won't be able to get out. The paths will loop. Time will loop. We'll walk the same ground over and over thinking we're making progress, but we'll just be going in circles forever." "Marcus, calm down." "I've been here for 3 days," he screamed. "Or 3 hours, or 3 minutes. I can't tell anymore. Every time I thought I was getting close to safety, I'd end up back at that boulder. Don't you get it? The forest traps you. It makes you walk in circles while time comes apart." I looked at the others. Mitchell's face was pale, and even Torres looked shaken. But Sadie's expression was different. She was looking past us, back the way we'd come, and her eyes were wide with terror. "Wade," she whispered. "They're coming." I turned. Through the trees, moving in our direction, I could see figures. Lots of them. Some wore ranger uniforms. Some wore hiking gear. Some wore clothing from different eras. I spotted what looked like an old park ranger uniform from the 1960s, a hiking outfit from even earlier, and they were all walking wrong. Some moved forward while facing backward. Some walked with their heads tilted at impossible angles. Some seemed to flicker in and out of existence with each step, but they were all moving toward us with that same too-perfect gait. "Move!" Brandt's voice crackled over the radio. "I can see you through the trees. You're almost here. Move now!" We ran. Whatever these things were, whatever was happening to this section of forest, we couldn't fight it. We could only run. The trees opened up ahead of us, and suddenly we were bursting into the clearing around Bald Mountain Shelter. True to his word, Brant had set up flares in a perimeter, and the bright red light was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We crossed into the circle of flares, and I felt something change. The oppressive weight on the air lifted slightly. The sound of our footsteps started echoing normally again. And behind us, at the edge of the flare line, the figures stopped. They stood there, dozens of them, swaying slightly in the dimness, watching us with faces that were almost right but not quite. Some of them I recognized. There was the not Mitchell and not Torres we'd seen on the trail. There was a figure that looked almost exactly like Marcus, but its eyes were completely black. There was even one that looked like Sadie, but its smile was too wide, showing too many teeth. And in the very back, barely visible, was a figure that looked like me. "Helicopter's 2 minutes out," Brant said, pulling me back to reality. "We need to get Weatherly ready for transport." We moved Marcus to the center of the clearing, away from the edges where those things waited. I could hear the helicopter now, the beautiful sound of rotors cutting through the heavy air. The figures at the edge of the flares began to retreat as the helicopter noise got louder. They moved backward into the trees, still facing us, still swaying. But they didn't leave. They just faded into the darkness between the trees, and I had the terrible certainty that they were still there, just out of sight, waiting. The helicopter landed, and the medical team immediately took charge of Marcus. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, he grabbed my hand. "Thank you," he said. "But you need to close this section of trail. Don't let anyone hike it after dark. Don't let anyone camp here. The night version is spreading. Every time someone gets caught in it, it gets bigger. It gets stronger. Marcus, promise me. Close the trail." "I promise." They loaded him into the helicopter, and it lifted off, banking hard to the east to get away from this section of ridge as quickly as possible. The 5 of us stood in the clearing, surrounded by flares, watching the darkness gather between the trees. None of us spoke. What was there to say? Brant finally broke the silence. "We need to hike out. All of us together, and we need to do it now, before full dark." We made it off the mountain just as the last light was fading from the sky. The hike back to the ranger station took 3 hours, twice as long as it should have, because we stayed in a tight group and double-checked every landmark, every trail marker, every turn. Nobody wanted to risk ending up like Marcus, walking in circles while reality came apart. When we finally reached the parking area, all 5 of us just stood there for a moment, breathing in the sight of our vehicles, the paved parking lot, the ordinary reality of streetlights and road signs. Torres actually got down on his knees and kissed the asphalt. Nobody laughed. The official report, the one that went to the National Park Service and the Forest Service and all the other relevant agencies, was carefully worded. We documented Marcus Weatherly's rescue, noted his condition as severe exhaustion complicated by dehydration and possible psychological trauma from being lost for an extended period. We recommended that section of trail be temporarily closed for safety evaluation and maintenance. The report made no mention of backward-facing footprints, figures that couldn't be touched, or shadows moving in the wrong direction. We weren't stupid. We knew how that would sound. But there was a second report, one that never made it into any official file. Brant compiled it from all of our observations, including the notes from Marcus's journal. He sent it to a contact he had at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, someone who'd been collecting similar reports from other sections of the AT for years. I read a draft of that report before he sent it. It made for disturbing reading. According to Brant's contact, there had been 47 documented cases in the last 30 years of hikers experiencing similar phenomena in remote sections of the Appalachian Trail. Most involved people who'd hiked after dark and reported seeing their own doubles, hearing footsteps that matched their pace exactly, or getting lost despite being experienced hikers on familiar trails. A few had described the same sensation Marcus reported, the feeling that the trail was reversing on them, that they were walking forward but somehow going backward. Some had mentioned seeing footprints that shouldn't exist, or prints that appeared ahead of them instead of behind them. Most of these hikers had been found eventually, usually in a state of severe psychological distress. A few had never been found at all. Their last known positions were marked on a map that Brant showed me. The marks clustered in certain areas. Our section of ridge was one of those clusters. "What do you think it is?" I asked him. Brant was quiet for a long time, staring at the map. "I don't know, but I've been doing this job for 26 years, and I've learned that there are places in these mountains where normal rules don't always apply. Usually it's small things, compasses that spin, GPS units that give impossible readings, spots where cell phones won't work no matter which carrier you use. This wasn't a small thing." "No," he agreed. "This was different. This was aggressive, active. Whatever's happening on that ridge, it's not just a dead zone or an anomaly. It's something that responds to human presence, something that uses our own forms against us. You sound like you believe it's intelligent." "I believe," he said carefully, "that there are aspects of wilderness that we don't understand. And I believe that when those aspects interact with human consciousness in certain conditions, strange things can happen. Call it mass hallucination if you want. Call it dimensional overlap, temporal displacement, psychological projection. I don't care what we call it. I just know that I saw things on that mountain that shouldn't be possible, and so did 4 other trained rangers and 1 civilian witness. That's enough for me to take it seriously." The trail section was officially closed 2 days later, pending comprehensive safety evaluation. The stated reason was unstable terrain and potential rockslide danger. The real reason was filed in Brant's unofficial report. Marcus Weatherly spent 3 days in the hospital undergoing evaluation. Physically, he was in rough shape but recovering. Psychologically, well, the doctors couldn't agree on a diagnosis. Some thought PTSD from a traumatic experience. Others suggested a psychotic episode brought on by exhaustion and exposure. One doctor noted that Marcus's descriptions of his experience were too consistent, too detailed, too rational to fit a typical psychotic break. I visited him on his last day in the hospital. He was sitting up in bed, looking out the window. A lot better than when we'd found him, but still haunted around the eyes. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Grateful to be alive. Grateful to be in a place where time moves in one direction and paths lead where they're supposed to lead." He turned to look at me. "Did you close the trail?" "It's closed." "Good. Keep it closed. Better yet, remove the markers, take it off the maps completely. Let the forest reclaim it." "Marcus, I need to ask you something. In your journal, you said you saw your own footprints ahead of you instead of behind you. Can you explain what you meant?" He was quiet for a moment. "You know how, when you hike, you can look back and see the trail you've walked? The footprints you've left, the disturbed leaves, the broken spider webs across the path?" I nodded. "Imagine seeing all of that ahead of you instead. Imagine walking forward and seeing your own boot prints that you haven't made yet. Seeing branches broken in a way that matches how you would break them. Seeing stones kicked aside exactly the way you would kick them. Like you're following your own past even though you haven't walked there yet." "That sounds like precognition." "It's not," he said firmly. "I've thought about it a lot, lying here. It's more like the trail exists in multiple times simultaneously. Past, present, and future all laid out at once. And at night, in that place, you can see them all. You can interact with them all. The you that walked the trail yesterday, the you that's walking it now, the you that will walk it tomorrow, all existing in the same space. That's impossible. I know, but that's what I experienced. And Wade? He looked at me intently. Those things we saw, the ones wearing our faces, I don't think they were trying to hurt us. I think they were trying to warn us. They were us, from other loops, from other times we'd walked that trail, trying to tell our present selves not to be there after dark. The thought sent chills down my spine. You're saying those things were actually us? From other timelines or loops or whatever? I'm saying that place doesn't follow normal rules, and anyone who walks that trail after dark risks becoming one of those warnings. Stuck there, walking the same ground forever, trying to warn new people away. I left the hospital thinking about his words, about those figures at the edge of the flare light, about the one that had looked like me, standing in the back, barely visible. Had that been a warning or a preview? That was 7 years ago. The trail section is still closed. The official reason has been updated several times. First, it was unstable terrain, then it was endangered species habitat requiring restricted access. Now, it's listed as closed for indefinite maintenance. A few hikers have ignored the closure signs and hiked it anyway. Most of them came out fine, just earned a citation and a fine. But 3 never came out at all. Search teams found no trace of them. Their last known positions, according to their GPS coordinates shared with family before they lost signal, were all in that same section of ridge where we'd found Marcus. Their names have been added to Brandt's unofficial report. I stayed with the Park Service for another 4 years after the incident. Good years, mostly. I did my job, I helped people, I protected wilderness. But I couldn't hike that section of ridge anymore. Couldn't even look at it from a distance without feeling that same oppressive weight in the air. I requested a transfer to a different district in 2019. Told my supervisors I wanted new challenges, new terrain to learn. The truth was, I couldn't be there anymore. Couldn't spend another winter knowing that just a few miles away, there was a place where trails led nowhere, where time moved sideways, where your own reflection might walk past you going the wrong direction. Sadie transferred out 6 months before I did. Last I heard, she was working coastal parks in California, as far from mountain ridges as you can get while still being a ranger. Mitchell and Torres both retired early. Brandt is still there, still compiling his reports, still tracking the patterns. He sent me an update last month. The closed section of trail is growing. The anomalies, the strange experiences, the reality distortions, they're appearing further and further from the original site. The boundary of what Brandt calls the affected zone has expanded by almost half a mile in each direction over the past 7 years. At this rate, his email said, we'll need to close 40 miles of trail within the next decade, and I don't think it'll stop there. I don't know what to do with that information. I'm not a ranger anymore. I work in an office now helping coordinate wilderness education programs. Safe, boring, exactly what I need. But sometimes, late at night, I think about Marcus Weatherly's last words to me in the hospital, about how the things we saw were trying to warn us, about how they were us, from other loops, other timelines, stuck there forever. And I think about that figure that looked like me, standing at the back of the group at the edge of the flare light. What if it wasn't from another timeline? What if it was from my future? What if somewhere down the line I go back to that ridge, and I don't make it out, and I end up as one of those warnings, walking backward through time trying to save my past self? I dream about it sometimes. In the dream, I'm hiking that ridge trail at dusk. I know I shouldn't be there, know I should turn back, but something pulls me forward. and then I hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. I don't want to turn around, but I can't help myself. I turn and I see myself walking toward me, but I'm walking backward, my face blank and empty. My mouth opens like I'm trying to say something, trying to warn myself, but no sound comes out. I wake up from these dreams with the certainty that it's not just a dream. It's a memory, or a preview, or both. That's the thing about time moving sideways, you can't tell the difference anymore. My name is Jonah Calloway, and I worked as a backcountry ranger in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia for 9 years before I transferred to a desk position in 2019. I'm telling you this story because I heard your other episodes about park rangers experiencing things they couldn't explain, and I realized that what happened to me and my partner in November of 2017 fits exactly that category. I've never told this story publicly before, mostly because I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. But after hearing similar accounts from other rangers, I think it's time to get it out there. The George Washington National Forest covers over 1 million acres across Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. It's old forest, the kind where trees have been growing undisturbed for centuries, and the terrain varies from gentle valleys to steep mountain ridges that'll test even experienced hikers. The section I was responsible for was in the Northern District, near the West Virginia border, an area known for its isolation and its history. Before I get into what happened, you need to understand something about fire lookout towers. These structures were built all across America's forests starting in the early 1900s, usually positioned on the highest peaks to give rangers a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. Rangers would staff these towers during fire season, spending days or even weeks alone up there, scanning the horizon for the telltale smoke that meant a forest fire had started. By the time I joined the Forest Service in 2010, most of these towers had been decommissioned. Modern technology, satellite surveillance, aircraft patrols, automated sensors, had made the old towers obsolete, but the structures themselves remained, slowly decaying on their mountain perches. Some had been converted into rental cabins for hikers. Others had been torn down. Many were just left to rot. The tower at Raven's Peak was one of the latter. It sat at the summit of a mountain about 15 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a steep, poorly maintained trail that saw maybe a dozen hikers per year. The tower itself was a classic design, a 40-foot steel frame supporting a small enclosed cabin at the top, with a staircase winding up the outside. It had been decommissioned in 1987, and by 2017 it was in rough shape. The Forest Service kept meaning to either restore it or tear it down, but budget constraints meant it just sat there, slowly rusting, a monument to a bygone era of forest management. Part of my job was to inspect these old structures every few months, make sure they weren't becoming hazardous to any hikers who might stumble across them. Most of the time, these inspections were straightforward. I'd hike out, take some photos, note any new damage, maybe post a few warning signs, and hike back. Easy day's work. The inspection scheduled for November 14, 2017, should have been exactly that routine. I wasn't supposed to go alone. Delia Prentice, another ranger who'd been with the Forest Service for about 3 years, was assigned to accompany me. We'd worked together before and had developed a good professional rapport. She was thorough, reliable, and importantly for those long hikes into the backcountry, she was comfortable with silence. Not everyone can spend hours hiking without feeling the need to fill every moment with conversation. We set out from the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The weather was typical for mid-November. Overcast, temperature in the low 40s, with a forecast calling for possible rain later in the day. We packed accordingly. Rain gear, extra layers, first aid kit, repair supplies for minor trail maintenance, and our radios. The hike to Raven's Peak took about 4 hours. The trail started in a valley, following a creek for the first few miles before beginning a brutal climb up the eastern face of the mountain. By the time we reached the summit, we were both breathing hard despite being in good shape. The elevation gain was over 2,000 feet, and the last mile was particularly steep. The tower came into view as we crested the final ridge. It stood exactly as I'd seen it 6 months earlier during my last inspection. A skeletal steel structure rising above the tree line, the cabin at the top dark and weathered, windows either broken or so dirty they looked opaque. The whole thing tilted slightly to the west, not enough to be immediately dangerous, but enough to be noticeable. "Charming," Delia said, pulling out her camera to document the structure's current state. I walked a slow circle around the base, checking the foundation posts. They were still secure in their concrete footings, though rust had eaten through several of the lower crossbeams. I made notes on my clipboard while Delia photographed the damage. "Stairs look sketchy," she observed, pointing to the metal staircase that wound up the outside of the tower. She was right. Several steps were missing their treads entirely, leaving just the framework. Others were badly rusted, and one near the 20-foot mark had twisted almost completely sideways. The railing was worse. In some sections it was gone entirely. In others it wobbled when I tested it with my hand from the ground. "We're not going up there, right?" Delia asked. Standard protocol said that if a structure looked unsafe, we didn't enter it. We documented its condition from the ground and recommended either repair or demolition. But I'd been up this particular tower during my last inspection with no problems, and I wanted to get interior photos to document how much the deterioration had progressed in 6 months. "I'll go up and check the cabin," I said. "You stay down here and spot me. If anything looks wrong, I come right back down." Delia didn't look happy about it, but she nodded. "Be careful. Test every step before you put your full weight on it." I started climbing. The first 20 feet were nerve-wracking. Those were the sections with the most damage. I skipped the twisted step entirely, stretching to reach the one above it. The stairs creaked and groaned under my weight, but they held. As I climbed higher, the view opened up. Even on an overcast day, you could see for miles in every direction. Forest stretched to every horizon, broken only by the occasional peak or the distant gleam of a creek cutting through a valley. It was beautiful in that stark, lonely way that wilderness can be. I reached the cabin at the top and tested the door. It was unlocked. The lock had rusted through years ago and opened with a shriek of corroded hinges. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a structure that had been abandoned for 30 years. Dust, cobwebs, dead leaves blown in through broken windows, and the accumulated debris of 3 decades. The cabin was a single room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with windows on all 4 sides. There was a built-in desk that ran along one wall, a few shelves, and the remains of what had probably been a cot in one corner. Everything was covered in a thick layer of grime. I took photos of the interior, noting the extent of the water damage on the floor, the broken windows, the rust eating through the metal frame. The whole time I was acutely aware of the swaying motion of the tower. Wind at this elevation was constant, and the entire structure moved slightly with each gust. Not dangerously, but enough to be unsettling. I was about to head back down when something caught my eye. On the desk, partially buried under debris, was what looked like a logbook. These were standard in the old towers. Rangers would record weather conditions, visibility, any fires spotted, visits from hikers. I picked it up carefully, the cover crumbling at my touch. The last entry was dated September 15, 1987. The handwriting was neat, controlled. Last day, tower decommissioned as of tomorrow. Spent 5 seasons up here. Will miss the solitude, will miss the view, won't miss the loneliness. Signed off at 1700 hours. Tower secure. M. Vance. Something about that entry stuck with me. The loneliness. 5 seasons alone up here, scanning the horizon for smoke, with only the radio for company. I thought about what that must have been like, especially before cell phones, before modern communication. Just you and the forest, and the endless sky. I put the logbook back where I'd found it and headed for the door. That's when I heard it for the first time. A footstep on the stairs below me. I froze, listening. The sound was distinct, metal ringing slightly as a weight transferred onto it. Then another step, then another. Someone was climbing the tower. "Delia," I called down. "Is that you?" No response, but the footsteps continued, steady and deliberate, coming up from below. I stepped to the doorway and looked down the staircase. I could see all the way to the ground from this angle. The stairs descended in a spiral around the tower's frame, and I had a clear view of most of them. There was no one there. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind, my heart rate elevated for reasons I couldn't quite explain. Then I heard Delia's voice from the ground, faint but clear. "Jonah, did you say something?" I leaned over the railing, carefully, given its condition. I could see her standing at the base of the tower, looking up at me. "Did you start climbing the stairs?" I called down. "No, you told me to stay down here. Did you hear footsteps?" Even from 40 feet up, I could see the confusion on her face. "What? No. Are you okay up there?" The footsteps started again. This time they were louder, closer, and they were coming from inside the cabin behind me. I spun around. The cabin was empty. I could see every corner of it. There was nowhere for someone to hide. But the footsteps continued, pacing from one side of the cabin to the other, the metal floor ringing with each step. I backed toward the doorway, my hand going to the radio on my belt. The footsteps matched my movement, staying always behind me, out of my line of sight even though the cabin was completely empty. "Jonah!" Delia's voice from below, urgent now. "What's happening?" I didn't answer. I was too focused on the impossible sound of someone walking in an empty room. The pacing continued for maybe 10 more seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I bolted. I hit the stairs moving too fast, not testing the steps like I should have, just trying to put distance between me and that empty cabin where something had been walking. My boot went through a rusted tread about halfway down, and I felt myself start to fall, but I caught the railing and pulled myself back up, kept moving. I practically fell off the last few steps, stumbling as I hit solid ground. Delia grabbed my arm to steady me. "What the hell happened up there?" she demanded. I was breathing hard, trying to sort my thoughts into something coherent. I heard footsteps in the cabin, but there was no one there. The cabin is completely empty, Delia. You can see every inch of it from the doorway. But I heard someone walking around up there. She looked up at the tower, then back at me. "Are you sure it wasn't just the structure settling? Wind making the metal flex? I know what wind sounds like." This was footsteps. Distinct, regular, like someone pacing. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then Delia pulled out her radio and keyed the mic. "Ranger station, this is Prentice. Radio check, over." Static crackled from the speaker, then our dispatcher's voice came through. "Prentice, this is station. Reading you 5 by 5. What's your status?" "We're at Raven's Peak conducting the tower inspection. Wanted to confirm you're receiving our transmissions clearly." "Affirmative. Signal is clear. Are you experiencing communication issues?" Delia and I looked at each other. "Negative," she said. "Just conducting a routine check. We'll be heading back shortly. Prentice out." I pulled out my own radio. "Let me try something." I switched to the channel we used for ranger-to-ranger communication. the one that didn't go through the base station. "Delia, can you hear me on this channel?" Her radio squawked, and my voice came through clearly. She keyed her mic. "Loud and clear." I stared up at the tower. Something was bothering me, something beyond the footsteps I'd heard. When I was up there, I called down to you, asked if you were climbing the stairs. "I heard you," she confirmed. "But before that, when I first heard the footsteps, I called out, 'Delia, is that you?' You didn't respond." She frowned. "I didn't hear that. The first time I heard your voice was when you asked if I was climbing. That doesn't make sense. I called out twice. You should have heard both times." We were interrupted by our radios crackling to life simultaneously. But it wasn't the dispatcher's voice. It was static, overlaid with something that might have been words but was too distorted to make out. Then it cut off abruptly. "Station, this is Prentice," Delia said into her radio. "Did you just attempt to contact us? We received a garbled transmission." "Negative, Prentice. We haven't transmitted since your last radio check. Are you receiving interference?" Before Delia could respond, we both heard it. A voice from the tower above us, faint but definitely human, calling out something we couldn't quite make out. We both looked up. The cabin at the top was visible through the metal framework, its broken windows dark. "Jonah," Delia said quietly, "please tell me you heard that too." "I heard it." The voice called out again, clearer this time. It was asking for help. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the cabin. Through the windows, I could see the interior. It was empty, exactly as I'd left it moments ago. But the voice continued, a man's voice, hoarse and desperate. "Help! Someone help me! I can't get down!" "Is there someone up there?" Delia asked, already moving toward the stairs. I grabbed her arm. "There's no one up there. I'm looking at the cabin right now. It's empty. But we both hear, I know what we hear. But I'm telling you, that cabin is empty." The voice changed, becoming angry. "Why won't you answer me? I can see you down there. Please, I've been stuck up here for days." Delia pulled out her radio again. "Station, this is Prentice. We have a situation at Raven's Peak. We're hearing distress calls from the tower, but visual confirmation shows no one present. Requesting guidance." The dispatcher's response took a moment. "Prentice, can you confirm what you just said? You're hearing distress calls but see no one?" "Affirmative," male voice claiming to be stuck in the tower. "But Calloway just descended from the cabin and confirmed it's empty. I have visual on the cabin right now and can confirm there's no one visible." Another pause. "Prentice, are you certain these calls are coming from the tower? Could there be a hiker in distress somewhere nearby?" It was a reasonable question. Sound carries strangely in the mountains. We could be hearing someone from a completely different location, the voice bouncing off rock faces and through valleys in a way that made it seem like it was coming from the tower. "Checking now," Delia said. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted toward the forest. "Hello, can you hear me? If you need help, call out." Silence from the forest. But the voice from the tower continued, now sounding panicked. "Down here, I'm down here. Why are you yelling into the woods?" "That's coming from the tower," I said. "Directly from above us, not from any other direction." Delia keyed her radio again. "Station, the calls are definitely emanating from the tower structure. But I repeat, visual confirmation shows no one present." "Copy that. Stand by." We waited, both of us staring up at the empty cabin, while the voice continued to call for help. Then the dispatcher came back on. "Prentice, Calloway. We've just checked our records. The last reported incident at Raven's Peak was in '96. A solo hiker became disoriented during a storm and took shelter in the tower. He was found deceased after 3 days. Cause of death was exposure and dehydration." Since then, there have been occasional reports from rangers conducting inspections. Reports of voices, footsteps, radio interference. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why weren't we briefed on this before the inspection? Because, the dispatcher said, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. Officially, those reports were attributed to acoustic anomalies and equipment malfunction. There's been no official acknowledgement of any anomalous activity at the site. Acknowledged, Delia said. What are our orders? Complete your inspection from the ground. Document the structure's condition. Then return to base. Do not enter the tower again. Copy that. She was cut off by a new sound. Not the voice calling for help, but footsteps. Lots of them. It sounded like a dozen people were climbing the stairs, their boots ringing on the metal in a chaotic rhythm. We both stepped back from the tower, watching as the stairs remained completely empty despite the cacophony of footfalls echoing from them. The sound grew louder, closer, as if whatever was making it was descending toward us. Then, abruptly, it stopped. In the silence that followed, I became aware of something I hadn't noticed before. The forest around us had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling through the leaves, just absolute silence. Delia, I said quietly, we need to leave. Now. She didn't argue. We gathered our equipment quickly, both of us keeping our eyes on the tower. As we backed away toward the trail, the voice started up again. But this time it wasn't calling for help. It was laughing, not a human laugh, not quite. It had the rhythm of laughter, the cadence, but the pitch was wrong. Too low, too resonant, like it was coming from something with a chest cavity much larger than any human's. We reached the trailhead and started down the mountain, moving as fast as the terrain would safely allow. Behind us, the laughter continued, echoing across the peak until distance finally swallowed it. We didn't speak during the entire 4-hour hike back to the ranger station. What was there to say? We'd both heard it. We'd both experienced it. And neither of us had any rational explanation for what had happened. When we finally reached the station and filed our report, our supervisor listened without interrupting. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You're not the first rangers to report irregularities at Raven's Peak, he finally said. Over the years, we've had similar accounts. Voices, footsteps, equipment malfunctions. We've sent technical teams up there multiple times. They never find anything wrong with the structure that would explain the acoustic phenomena. What do you think it is? Delia asked. He shook his head. I don't know. Some people think it's infrasound, low-frequency vibrations created by wind moving through the tower's structure in certain ways. Can cause auditory hallucinations, feelings of unease, even visual disturbances. Others think it's some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. The mountain has a lot of iron ore in it, and some theorize that could create fields that interfere with electronics and possibly brain function. And what do you think? I asked. He looked at us both seriously. I think some places are just wrong. I think there are spots in these mountains where things happen that we can't explain with science or logic. And I think Raven's Peak is one of those places. That should have been the end of it. We filed our report, recommended that the tower be demolished as soon as funding allowed, and I assumed I'd never have to think about Raven's Peak again. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, on December 5th, I was working a routine shift when I got a call from the dispatch office. A hiker had called in from the summit of Raven's Peak. He was requesting emergency assistance. What's his emergency? I asked. The dispatcher's voice was tight. He says he's trapped in the lookout tower. Says he climbed up to take photos and now the stairs have collapsed. He's been up there for 2 days. Everything in me went cold. That's impossible. The stairs were intact when Delia and I inspected it 3 weeks ago. I'm just telling you what he's reporting. He's on his cell phone, battery is dying. He says he's running out of water. Did you explain to him that rangers inspected that tower recently and it was accessible? I did. He insists the stairs are gone, collapsed. He can't get down. I thought about the voice we'd heard, claiming to be stuck in the tower. I thought about the laughter. Send someone else, I said. I'm not going back to that tower. There was a pause. Jonah, you know the site better than anyone. You just inspected it. You're the logical choice. I don't care. Find someone else. My supervisor got on the line. Calloway, we have a civilian in potential distress. Whatever you experienced during your inspection, we need to put that aside and focus on helping this person. You don't understand. That tower, I understand perfectly. But we have a job to do. If this person is genuinely trapped, they need help. If they're not, we need to determine what's actually happening. Either way, we need a ranger on site. He was right, and I knew it. That didn't make it any easier. Delia comes with me, I said. She's already suiting up. You leave in 20 minutes. The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes. Delia and I didn't talk much. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd experienced. We both knew what we were walking back into. We made better time on the hike up. We were moving with purpose now, not just conducting a routine inspection. We also packed more equipment: rope, climbing harness, emergency medical supplies. If someone was actually trapped up there, we'd need to get them down. The tower came into view as we crested the ridge. From a distance, it looked exactly as we'd left it. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the structure carefully. The stairs were intact. Every single one. The twisted step at the 20-foot mark, the missing treads, the damaged railing, everything exactly as it had been 3 weeks ago. Stairs look fine to me, Delia said, looking through her own binoculars. We approached cautiously. I had my radio ready, though I wasn't sure who I expected to call. The hiker who'd reported being trapped? The dispatcher? God? Hello, I called up toward the cabin. This is Park Ranger Calloway. We received your distress call. Can you hear me? No response. I keyed my radio. Station, this is Calloway. We're on site at Raven's Peak. The tower's stairs appear intact. No visual on the reporting party. No response to verbal hailing. Copy that, Calloway. The hiker's phone has gone to voicemail. Last contact was approximately 40 minutes ago. I looked at Delia. Someone needs to go up there. I'll do it this time, she said. You went up last time. Part of me wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I should be the one to take the risk. But another part of me, the part that had heard those footsteps in the empty cabin, was relieved. Delia started climbing. I watched her carefully, ready to shout a warning if any of the damaged steps looked like they might give way. She moved slowly, testing each step before committing her weight to it. She was about 30 feet up when my radio crackled to life. But it wasn't the dispatcher's voice, it was Delia's. Jonah, can you hear me? I looked up at her on the stairs. She wasn't holding her radio. Both hands were gripping the railing as she navigated around a particularly damaged section. Delia, I said into my radio. I can see you. You're not on your radio. What? Jonah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't come up here. Something is wrong with this cabin. I watched Delia on the stairs. She still wasn't holding her radio, but her voice continued to come through on my radio, sounding urgent and afraid. Jonah, there's someone else up here. I can hear them breathing, but I can't see them. Jonah, you need to call for backup. Don't come up here alone. The real Delia, the one I could see on the stairs, had stopped climbing. She was looking down at me, and I could see the confusion on her face even from this distance. I keyed my mic. Delia, what's your status? Her voice came through my radio twice, overlapping itself. One voice saying, "I'm about 30 feet up, approaching the cabin," and another voice saying, "I'm inside the cabin and I'm not alone." I felt my hands start to shake. "Station, this is Callaway. We are experiencing severe radio interference, possibly equipment malfunction." "Copy, Callaway. We're also receiving—" The dispatcher's voice cut off, replaced by that same static overlaid with distortion we'd heard before. Then a new voice came through, one I didn't recognize. "Ranger Station, this is Michael Vance, Ravens Peak Lookout. Reporting in for my evening check. Weather is clear, visibility good, no fires spotted. Over." I pulled the radio away from my ear, staring at it. Michael Vance. The ranger who'd written the last entry in the logbook. The one who'd signed off for the final time in 1987. "Station," I said urgently. "Did you copy that last transmission?" "Negative, Callaway. We heard only static. Please repeat your message." Before I could respond, Delia's scream echoed down from the tower. Not through the radio. This was her actual voice, raw and terrified. I looked up to see her scrambling down the stairs, moving recklessly fast, nearly falling twice as damaged steps gave way beneath her feet. She hit the ground running and grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the tower. "We need to leave," she gasped. "Now. Right now." "What did you see?" "I didn't see anything. I heard—" She stopped, struggling to catch her breath. I heard myself. I heard my own voice coming from inside the cabin, having a conversation with someone. But I wasn't saying those words. It was my voice, but I wasn't speaking. What was the voice saying? It was reporting in, like I was stationed up there, like I was the ranger assigned to the tower. It was giving weather reports, visibility reports, and then... She stopped, her face going pale. Then what? Then it started screaming. My own voice screaming for help. Saying the stairs had collapsed, saying I'd been trapped up there for days. We both turned to look at the tower. The stairs were intact. Completely intact. But as we watched, we heard the sound of metal groaning, then a crash like a structure collapsing. The stairs didn't move. They remained exactly as they were. But the sound was unmistakable. The sound of a staircase tearing away from its moorings and crashing to the ground. "I'm calling this in," I said, pulling out my radio. But before I could key the mic, it squawked to life again. "This is Ranger Callaway at Ravens Peak. I need immediate assistance. The tower stairs have collapsed while I was inside the cabin. I'm trapped. I'm running low on water. Please send help." It was my voice, my exact voice, but I wasn't speaking. Delia grabbed her radio. "Station, this is Prentice. Disregard any calls from Callaway's radio. We are both on the ground, both safe. We are experiencing some kind of transmission anomaly. Prentice, we're receiving multiple transmissions from your location. Can you confirm your actual position? We are at the base of Ravens Peak Tower. Both rangers on the ground. The hiker who reported being trapped is not present. Repeat, no hiker on site. Copy that. But Prentice, we're receiving distress calls from both your radio and Callaway's radio. The calls claim you're both trapped in the tower." I looked at my radio. The transmit light wasn't on. I wasn't broadcasting. But my voice continued to come through, now joined by Delia's voice. Both of us apparently trapped. Both calling for help. Neither of us actually speaking. "Station," I said carefully. "I need you to pull the records on that 1996 incident you mentioned. The hiker who died in the tower. Stand by." We waited, both of us watching the tower while our own voices called for help from radios we weren't using. The sun was getting lower. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. The dispatcher came back on. "Callaway, records show the hiker's name was Thomas Brightwell, age 32. He took shelter in the tower during a severe thunderstorm in August 1996. He called 911 from his cell phone, reported that lightning had damaged the tower's stairs during the storm and he couldn't safely descend. Rescue teams were delayed due to the weather. By the time they reached the site 3 days later, Brightwell had died from dehydration. What was the condition of the stairs when rescue teams arrived? Another pause. Records show the stairs were intact, damaged by rust but structurally sound. The rescue team couldn't determine why Brightwell believed he couldn't descend safely. Delia and I looked at each other. "What was the ranger's name?" I asked. "The one who died here. The last one to man this tower before it was decommissioned. I don't have a record of any ranger dying at this location. Pull the employment records for Raven's Peak Lookout Tower. Last person assigned to it." More waiting. Then, last assignment was Ranger Michael Vance, 1983 through 1987. He transferred to a different district after the tower was decommissioned. Records show he retired in 2003. Is he still alive? Unknown. He'd be in his 70s now if he is. I thought about that last logbook entry. We'll miss the solitude. We'll miss the view. Won't miss the loneliness. "Station, we need to leave this site," Delia said into her radio. "But before we do, I need you to understand something. This tower, something is wrong with it. Not equipment malfunction. Not acoustic anomalies. Something genuinely wrong. Prentice, I need you to..." The dispatcher's voice cut off. All our radios went dead simultaneously, not even static coming through. I tried changing channels, tried adjusting the volume. Nothing. The radios were completely dead. "Check your phone," I told Delia. She pulled it out. No signal. "You?" I checked mine. Same thing. We were suddenly completely cut off from the outside world, standing at the base of a tower that seemed to be broadcasting our voices without our consent, in a forest that had gone unnaturally quiet. "We leave now," Delia said. "We don't investigate. We don't try to figure out what's happening. We leave, and we call in a full team with proper equipment." I nodded, but before we could move, we heard it again. Footsteps. But this time they weren't coming from the tower. They were coming from the trail behind us, from the direction we needed to go to get back down the mountain. We turned. The trail was empty, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. Not the sound of boots on dirt and rock like you'd expect. These footsteps had that distinctive ring of boots on metal, like someone walking up tower stairs. But they were coming from the forest trail. "That's not possible," Delia whispered. The footsteps stopped about 20 feet from us. We could hear breathing now, heavy and labored, like someone who'd been climbing for a long time. But we could see nothing. The trail was empty. Then a voice spoke, coming from that empty spot on the trail. A man's voice, weak and desperate. "Please, I've been trying to get down. I can see the ground, but I can't reach it. The stairs keep going up even when I walk down them. Please help me." I pulled out my flashlight and shined it at the spot where the voice was coming from. The beam cut through the afternoon dimness, illuminating nothing but empty trail. "We can't see you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you need help, you need to show yourself." "I am showing myself." The voice was getting frantic. "I'm right here. I'm looking at you. Why won't you acknowledge me?" Delia grabbed my arm. "Jonah, look at the tower." I turned. In the cabin at the top, visible through the broken windows, there was a figure. Just a silhouette, but definitely human-shaped. Standing at the window, looking down at us. I hadn't seen anyone climb the tower. The stairs had been in our line of sight the entire time. But there was definitely someone, or something, up there now. "Hello?" I called up. "Can you hear me?" The figure at the window moved, raised an arm, waved. "Finally," the voice from the trail behind us said. "Finally, someone can see me. I've been trying to get your attention. Can you help me down?" "We can't help you," Delia said, and I heard the tremor in her voice. "We can't help you because we don't know where you are. I'm in the tower. I told you. I've been trapped here for days. The stairs are fine," I interrupted. "We can see them. They're intact." No, they're not. They collapsed during the storm. I watched them fall. I've been stuck up here ever since." I looked at Delia. Thomas Brightwell, the hiker from 1996. She nodded slowly. "But that was over 20 years ago. For us. But what if for him, it's still 1996? What if he's still experiencing those 3 days stuck in a loop, calling for help that never comes?" The figure in the tower window began to move. It was pacing, the same way I'd heard footsteps pacing when I'd been up there during our first inspection. Back and forth, in that small cabin. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," I called up toward the tower. "What's your name?" "Thomas Brightwell. Are you the rescue team? It's about time. I've been calling for 3 days." "Thomas, I need you to tell me what year it is." Silence, then. "What kind of question is that? It's 96. August 1996. "What day?" I've lost track. I called 911 on the 15th. I think it's the 17th now? Maybe the 18th? Delia pulled out her radio again, even though we knew it was dead. But as soon as she keyed the mic, it crackled to life. "Hello, is anyone receiving this transmission? This is Ranger Michael Vance at Ravens Peak Lookout. I have eyes on a hiker in distress in the tower. He appears disoriented, requesting immediate medical assistance. Over?" "That's not possible," I said. "Vance retired years ago." But the voice continued. "Hiker is responding to my radio calls but claims rescue teams haven't arrived yet. I'm attempting to talk him down. He's displaying signs of severe dehydration and possible heat exhaustion. This is a medical emergency. Over?" Then another voice joined in. Female this time. "Ranger Station. This is Ranger Prentice at Ravens Peak. We have multiple individuals reporting they're trapped in the tower, but visual confirmation shows the tower is empty, requesting guidance on how to proceed." "That's my voice," Delia said, her face pale. "But I didn't say that. I just said it now, but I didn't." "I know," I said. The radio erupted with overlapping voices. Michael Vance reporting in from 1987. Thomas Brightwell calling for help from 1996. Delia and me reporting our inspection from 3 weeks ago. All of it happening simultaneously, all of it bleeding together into a cacophony of temporal echoes, and then, cutting through all of it, a new voice, calm, professional, familiar. "This is Ranger Jonah Calloway at Ravens Peak. I'm conducting a routine inspection of the fire lookout tower. Structure appears sound, stairs intact. No immediate hazards noted. Inspection complete. Over." I wasn't speaking, but it was my voice, clear as day, reporting in from some future inspection I hadn't conducted yet. "We need to leave," Delia said, "right now." But as we turned toward the trail, we saw them. Figures emerging from the trees. Indistinct, wavering like heat mirages, but definitely human-shaped. They were all walking toward the tower, all climbing the stairs that were and weren't there, all becoming trapped in whatever loop this place had created. "They're not real," I said, more to convince myself than Delia. "They're just echoes, recordings. They can't hurt us." As if in response, one of the figures turned toward us. Its face was a blur, features indistinct, but I could feel it looking at us. And then it spoke, in my voice. "Help me. I can't find my way down. I've been walking these stairs for hours, but I always end up back in the cabin. Help me." "Run," Delia said. We ran. We crashed through the forest, abandoning the trail entirely. The figures didn't chase us. They weren't interested in us. They were all focused on the tower, all climbing those stairs that existed in multiple times simultaneously, all becoming trapped in whatever temporal anomaly that structure had created. Behind us, the voices continued. Dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, all calling for help, all reporting in, all experiencing their own personal loop of being trapped in that tower. How many rangers had manned that post over the decades? How many hikers had taken shelter there? How many people had climbed those stairs and never truly left? We didn't stop running until we were at least a mile down the trail. Only then did we slow to a walk, both of us breathing hard, both of us checking over our shoulders constantly to make sure nothing had followed us. Our radios crackled back to life simultaneously. "Callaway, Prentice, this is Station. We lost contact with you approximately 30 minutes ago. What's your status?" Delia and I looked at each other. 30 minutes? We'd been at the tower for at least 3 hours. "Station," I said carefully. "What time do you show for our last transmission?" 1447 hours. You reported arriving on site and beginning inspection. I checked my watch. It read 1823. But according to the station, it should be 1517. "Station, we're heading back. Inspection complete. Tower is not safe for public access. Recommend immediate demolition." "Copy that. See you when you get back." We hiked in silence for another hour. The sun was setting now, the forest growing dark around us. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound in the underbrush made us jump. We kept our flashlights out and our radios on, though I wasn't sure what good they would do if that place decided to reach out for us again. We were maybe 2 miles from the trailhead when Delia stopped abruptly. "Jonah, what if we didn't leave?" "What do you mean?" "What if we're still there? What if we're still at the tower, and we just think we're hiking out, but we're actually just walking in circles the same way Thomas Brightwell thought he was climbing down, but was actually just going up and up forever?" It was a terrifying thought, and one I'd been trying not to think about. "Check your GPS," I said. She pulled out her phone. It showed us on the trail, moving toward the trailhead, making steady progress, but then the screen flickered, and for just a moment, the GPS showed us at a different location, at the tower. "No," Delia said, her voice rising. "No, no, no, we left, we're leaving, this is real." I grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at me. "It is real, we're leaving. That was just interference, the same way the radios got interference. We're not trapped, we're not in a loop." But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. We reached the trailhead just as full darkness fell. Our vehicle was there exactly where we'd left it. Solid, real, proof that we'd actually made it out. We got in and drove away from that place as fast as the forest roads would safely allow. Neither of us spoke until we were back on the highway, 20 miles from Raven's Peak, with streetlights and houses and all the normal trappings of civilization surrounding us. "We can't tell anyone about this," Delia finally said. "Not the truth. They'll think we're crazy." "We filed an accurate report after our first inspection," I said. "Voices, footsteps, anomalies, it's in the official record." And look how much good that did. They attributed it to acoustics and equipment problems. She was right. We could file another report, could detail everything we'd experienced, and it would be filed away with all the other reports from rangers who'd experienced impossible things at that tower. Cataloged, analyzed, and ultimately dismissed. "What do we do?" I asked. "We recommend demolition. We cite structural instability, public safety concerns, whatever official reason will get that tower torn down. And then we never go back there." That's exactly what we did. Our official report stated that the Ravens Peak Fire Lookout Tower had deteriorated beyond safe repair and posed a significant hazard to any hikers who might attempt to access it. We recommended immediate demolition. The request was approved in January 2018. A demolition crew was scheduled to remove the tower in March, as soon as weather permitted. They never made it to the site. The crew set out on March 15, 2018. They radioed in when they reached the trailhead. They radioed again an hour into the hike, reporting good progress. Their final transmission came at 11:37 a.m., stating they were approximately 1 mile from the tower and would begin demolition operations within the hour. They were never heard from again. A search and rescue operation was launched the following day. They found the crew's vehicles at the trailhead. They found footprints on the trail leading up toward the tower, but they never found the crew members themselves. The search continued for 2 weeks. They covered every inch of that mountain. They brought in dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging equipment. Nothing. On the final day of the search, one of the SAR team members reported hearing voices from the tower. Multiple voices calling for help, saying they'd been trapped for days. When the team investigated, they found the tower empty. But their radios picked up transmission after transmission, all from people claiming to be trapped, unable to get down, calling for rescue. The search was called off. The 5 members of the demolition crew were declared missing, presumed dead. And Ravens Peak Tower stands to this day. The Forest Service closed the trail to that section of mountain. Official reason: unstable terrain and avalanche risk. The trail markers were removed. It was taken off all official maps. For all practical purposes, that section of wilderness no longer exists on paper, but it exists. And the tower is still there, collecting echoes. I left the Forest Service in 2019, less than a year after the demolition crew disappeared. I couldn't do the job anymore. Couldn't work in those forests knowing what was out there. Couldn't sleep at night without hearing those voices, all calling for help, all trapped in their own personal loops of time and terror. Delia left around the same time. Last I heard, she was working as a wilderness guide in Alaska, as far from Virginia as she could get while still working outdoors. I think about that tower sometimes. I think about Michael Vance writing his final entry in that logbook. Won't miss the loneliness. Did he know? Did he sense that something was wrong with that place even then? Did he feel the weight of all those future voices, all those trapped souls, pressing down on him during those long, lonely days, scanning the horizon for fires? I think about Thomas Brightwell, taking shelter from a storm, watching the stairs collapse, or thinking he watched them collapse, and calling for help that would arrive too late. Is he still there, still experiencing those same 3 days over and over, always hoping rescue is just a few hours away? I think about the demolition crew. 5 people who went to tear down a structure and instead became part of it. Are they climbing those stairs now, over and over, thinking they're making progress but always ending up back where they started? And I think about something Delia said to me a few weeks after our second visit to the tower. We were having coffee, trying to process what we'd experienced, and she asked me a question that still haunts me. "What if it's not the tower?" she said. "What if it's the mountain? What if Ravens Peak itself is the anomaly, and the tower is just the focal point because it's the highest structure? What if we tore down the tower and whatever is happening there just spread to cover the whole mountain?" I didn't have an answer then. I don't have one now. What I do know is this: there are places in the wilderness where the normal rules don't apply. Places where time gets confused, where past and future bleed into the present, where echoes become trapped and play on endless loops. Places that collect voices and hold on to them long after the speakers have moved on or died. Ravens Peak is one of those places. And I'm grateful every day that I made it off that mountain before it collected my echo too. I received an email 2 months ago from a hiker I don't know. He'd found my name in some old Forest Service records and wanted to ask me about Raven's Peak. He was planning a solo hike through that section of the George Washington National Forest and had noticed the closed trail on old maps. He wanted to know if it had been reopened. I told him no. I told him the trail was permanently closed. I told him to stay away from that mountain. He wrote back, "I'm an experienced hiker and I don't scare easily. I've been on hundreds of trails. What could possibly be dangerous about this one?" I stared at that email for a long time before responding. How do you explain something that defies explanation? How do you convince someone that a place is dangerous when the danger isn't bears or cliffs or weather, but something that exists outside the normal flow of time? I wrote, "If you go to Raven's Peak and you hear voices calling for help from the tower, don't respond to them. Don't try to rescue them. Don't even acknowledge them. They're not real in the way you understand real. They're echoes, trapped in time. And if you try to help them, you risk becoming an echo yourself." He wrote back, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Are you seriously telling me not to help someone in distress because they might be a time echo? I thought park rangers were supposed to be rational people." I didn't respond to that email. There was nothing more I could say. Either he'd listen to my warning or he wouldn't. 3 weeks later, I got another email. This one was from the hiker's wife. He'd gone on his solo hike as planned. He'd checked in by satellite phone when he reached the trailhead. That was 5 days ago. He hadn't been heard from since. Search and rescue teams had found his vehicle. They'd found his footprints leading up the trail toward Raven's Peak, but they couldn't find him. And they'd heard voices from the tower. Lots of voices, including one that matched the description of her husband. I didn't respond to that email either. What could I say? That her husband was now part of the collection, that his voice would join all the others, calling for help, trapped in an eternal loop of seeking rescue that would never come. Instead, I did what I've been thinking about doing for months. I started writing this account, this detailed explanation of everything that happened at Raven's Peak, not for an official report that will be filed and forgotten. Not for supervisors who'll attribute it to stress or equipment malfunction or mass hallucination. For you. For anyone who might be considering hiking to Raven's Peak. For anyone who hears about that abandoned fire lookout tower and thinks it would be cool to explore. For anyone who receives a warning about that place and considers ignoring it. Don't. Just don't. Some places are wrong in ways we can't understand. Some structures collect more than just dust and debris. Some mountains hold on to voices and won't let them go. Raven's Peak is one of those places. The tower is still there, standing on that summit, slowly rusting but never quite falling apart. The stairs are intact. The cabin at the top is empty. But if you climb those stairs, you might hear footsteps behind you that don't belong to anyone you can see. You might hear voices calling for help from an empty room. You might look down and see figures climbing the stairs even though you're alone on the mountain. And if you're very unlucky, you might find that when you try to leave, the stairs lead you back up instead of down. That the mountain won't let you go. That you've become another echo, another voice in the collection, another person calling for help that will never arrive. I was lucky. I got out. The demolition crew wasn't lucky. Thomas Brightwell wasn't lucky. That solo hiker who ignored my warning wasn't lucky. And I guarantee you won't be lucky either if you ignore this warning and go there anyway. So please, if you take nothing else from this story, take this. Stay away from Raven's Peak. Stay away from that tower. And if you're ever hiking in the mountains and you hear voices calling for help from an empty structure, don't investigate. Because some echoes don't want to just be heard. They want company. My name is Marvin Tolliver, and I worked as a wilderness ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky for 12 years before requesting a transfer to a district office position in 2020. I'm sharing this story because after listening to your other episodes about rangers encountering unexplainable phenomena, I realized that what happened to me and my partner in September of 2018 deserves to be told, even if I still can't make sense of it. The Daniel Boone National Forest covers over 700,000 acres of eastern Kentucky wilderness. It's rugged country, steep ridges, narrow valleys, limestone cliffs, and cave systems that run for miles underground. The section I patrolled was in the Red River Gorge area, known for its natural stone arches, sheer cliff faces, and dense forest that can swallow a person whole if they wander off the marked trails. Before I get into what happened, you need to understand something about night patrols in that part of Kentucky. Most rangers work daylight hours, but during peak hiking season, spring through fall, we run overnight patrols to check on backcountry campsites, make sure hikers aren't starting illegal fires, and occasionally assist lost or injured people who don't have the sense to stay put until morning. Night patrol is different from daytime work in ways that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't done it. The forest changes after dark. Sounds carry differently. Your depth perception gets thrown off, and you develop this constant low-level awareness that you're alone in a very big, very dark place where help is hours away if something goes wrong. I'd been doing night patrols for 8 years by September 2018, so I was comfortable with the work. My partner that night was Reed Upchurch, a younger ranger who'd transferred to our district about 6 months earlier. He was competent, followed protocol, and most importantly, he didn't get spooked easily. You need that quality for night work. The patrol scheduled for September 12th was routine. We were checking a section of the Sheltowee Trace Trail, a backcountry route that sees moderate traffic but is remote enough that problems can develop quickly if hikers get injured or lost. The weather forecast called for rain overnight, but nothing severe, just typical September showers. We started our patrol around 8 p.m. just after sunset. The plan was to hike a 10-mile loop, checking 3 designated camping areas and making sure no one was in distress. We packed standard gear: flashlights, first aid kit, emergency communication equipment, rain gear, and enough supplies for an overnight stay if we encountered a situation that required us to stay with someone until morning. The rain started about an hour into our hike, right on schedule. Not a downpour, just a steady drizzle that made everything slick and turned the trail into a ribbon of mud. We pulled on our rain jackets and kept moving. We were maybe 3 miles in when Reed stopped abruptly ahead of me on the trail. "Marvin, look at this." I came up beside him and followed his flashlight beam to the ground. There, clear as day in the fresh mud, was a footprint, a bare footprint, human, adult-sized, deeply impressed into the soft earth. "Someone's hiking barefoot?" Reed said, the question evident in his tone. I knelt down to examine the print more closely. It was fresh. The edges were sharp. The rain hadn't had time to soften them yet. The foot appeared to be a man's, maybe size 10 or 11, and the depth of the impression suggested someone of average weight moving at a normal walking pace. "In this weather, on this terrain," I said, "that's a good way to destroy your feet." We'd occasionally encounter hikers who decided to go barefoot on trails, usually as part of some misguided attempt to connect with nature. It was universally a bad idea, especially on rocky trails like this one, and especially at night in the rain. I stood up and swept my flashlight along the trail ahead of us. More prints, all bare feet, all heading in the same direction we were traveling. The spacing was consistent. Whoever this was, they were walking at a steady pace, not running or stumbling. "We need to catch up to them," Reed said. "They could be hypothermic, injured, definitely not thinking straight." I agreed. We picked up our pace, following the prints down the trail. They were easy to track in the muddy conditions. Each print stood out clearly, filling with water almost as soon as it was made. We followed them for maybe half a mile. The prints never wavered, never showed any sign of the person stopping or hesitating. Just steady, even steps, heading deeper into the wilderness. Then the prints did something impossible. We came around a bend in the trail where a large oak tree had fallen years ago, creating a natural obstacle that hikers had to navigate around. The barefoot prints approached the fallen tree and then they split. One set of prints went left around the tree, another set went right. Both sets were identical. Same size, same depth, same spacing. But there was only one person. Reed and I stood there in the rain, staring at the diverging tracks. "That's not possible," Reed said quietly. I checked both sets of prints carefully. They were absolutely identical. Not similar, identical. Same pressure distribution, same toe spread, same everything. It was as if the same foot had stepped in two places simultaneously. "Maybe someone else joined them," Reed suggested. "Another barefoot hiker with the exact same size feet?" We both knew how unlikely that was. But what was the alternative? That one person had somehow split into two and walked around both sides of the fallen tree at the same time. "We follow both sets," I decided. "You take the left fork, I'll take the right. We keep visual contact and we move slowly. If either of us sees anything unusual, we regroup immediately." Reed nodded, and we split up, moving around opposite sides of the fallen oak. The prints continued on both sides, still identical, still showing the same steady walking pace. I kept Reed in sight through the trees as we moved. He was maybe 20 feet away from me, paralleling my route on the other side of the obstacle. The prints I was following remained clear and distinct, freshly made. The person who'd left them seemingly just minutes ahead of me. We cleared the fallen tree and the trail converged back into a single path. That's where both sets of prints should have merged back together. They didn't. Instead, they both just stopped. Not stopped like the person had turned around or stepped off the trail. The prints just ended mid-stride, as if whoever made them had been lifted straight up into the air. Reed and I met at the spot where the prints ended, both of us sweeping our flashlights across the ground, looking for any continuation of the trail. There was nothing. The mud beyond that point was smooth and undisturbed except for the rain. "Check the sides of the trail," I said, though I already knew we wouldn't find anything. We searched the area thoroughly, no prints leading off into the forest, no signs of anyone climbing a tree or scrambling up the rocky outcropping beside the trail. The person, or people, or whatever, had simply vanished. Reed pulled out his radio. "Ranger station, this is Upchurch. We're approximately 3.5 miles in on the Sheltowee Trace, and we've encountered something unusual. We've been following fresh barefoot prints in the mud, but the trail has gone cold, requesting guidance." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the rain. "Upchurch, can you confirm barefoot prints in current weather conditions?" "Affirmative. Fresh prints, made within the last 15 to 20 minutes based on rain fill rate. Adult male, approximately size 10 to 11. Prints split around an obstacle, then both sets terminated simultaneously with no clear indication of where the individual went." There was a pause on the other end. "Upchurch, are you saying the prints split into two separate trails?" "Affirmative." Another pause, longer this time. "Stand by." We waited in the rain, both of us staring at the spot where the prints ended. I was running through every rational explanation I could think of. Someone playing a prank, somehow creating fake prints? But how would they make them appear so fresh? And how would they create two identical sets? someone with a twin, both walking barefoot for some inexplicable reason. But the prints had split from a single trail. We'd both seen that clearly. The radio crackled again. "Upchurch, Tolliver. This is Supervisor Hammond. I need you to document the prints thoroughly. Photos, measurements, the works. Then continue your patrol route. If you encounter any actual hikers, check their footwear and verify they're not injured or in distress. But don't spend all night chasing ghost prints." "Copy that," I responded. "But sir, these aren't ghost prints. They're real physical impressions in the mud. Something made them." "I understand that, Tolliver. Document them and move on. We'll review the evidence when you get back." We spent the next 20 minutes photographing the prints from every angle, taking measurements and making detailed notes. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept sweeping my flashlight into the trees, expecting to see someone standing there in the darkness, but there was never anything. Reed felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, the way his hand kept drifting to the radio on his belt. "This doesn't make sense," he said as we finished our documentation. "I've seen a lot of strange things out here, but I've never seen anything like this." "Neither have I admitted. "But we've got our orders. We document and move on." We continued down the trail, both of us more alert than we'd been at the start of the patrol. The rain had picked up, coming down harder now, turning the trail into a stream of flowing mud. If there had been any other prints, they would have been washed away by now. We reached the first designated camping area around 11 p.m. It was empty. No tents, no hikers, no signs of recent occupation. We checked the fire ring, verified that no one had been starting illegal fires, and moved on to the next site. The second site was about 2 miles further along the trail. We were halfway there when Reed stopped again. "Marvin, the prints are back." I came up beside him and looked down. He was right. There in the mud, fresh and clear despite the rain, were barefoot prints. The same size, the same depth, the same steady walking pace. But now they were going the opposite direction, heading back the way we'd come. "They're walking toward us," Reed said, his voice tight. We stood there for a moment, both of us processing this new impossibility. The prints we'd followed earlier had ended with no indication of the person turning around. But here were prints, clearly made by the same feet, coming from the direction we were heading and going back the way we'd come. "Could it be someone else?" Reed asked, though I could tell he didn't believe it. I knelt down and examined the prints closely. Same size, same pressure distribution, same everything. These were made by the same feet that had created the prints we'd followed earlier. "We need to follow them back," I said. "See where they lead. Our patrol route can wait. If someone is out here in distress, walking barefoot in the rain, we need to find them." We turned around and started following the prints back along the trail. They were easier to follow now. The rain was creating small streams in the tracks, making them stand out clearly in our flashlight beams. We followed them for about a mile, retracing our own earlier route. The prints led us right back to the spot where the original tracks had ended. And there, in the mud, we saw something that made my blood run cold. There were now 4 sets of prints. The original 2 sets that had split around the fallen oak tree and then ended. And 2 new sets, these ones coming from the other direction and ending at the exact same spot. 4 trails of identical barefoot prints, all converging on a single point, all terminating as if the people who'd made them had been lifted into the air. "This isn't real," Reed said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This can't be real." But it was real. We could see it, photograph it, measure it. 4 sets of prints, all made by the same feet, all ending at the same impossible spot. I pulled out my radio. "Supervisor Hammond, this is Tolliver. We have a situation. The prints have multiplied. We're now looking at 4 separate trails, all identical, all terminating at the same location. Say again, Tolliver? I explained what we were seeing, trying to keep my voice level and professional. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Tolliver, I need you and Upchurch to get off that trail, now. End your patrol and return to base. Sir, if there's someone out here, there's no one out there, Tolliver. Or if there is, it's not someone you can help. Get off that trail and get back here. That's an order. I looked at Reed. He nodded slowly. We both understood what our supervisor was really saying. Whatever was making those prints wasn't something we were equipped to deal with. We started back toward the trailhead, moving quickly but carefully on the slick trail. The rain had intensified, coming down in sheets now, and visibility was down to maybe 15 feet even with our flashlights. We'd gone maybe half a mile when Reed grabbed my arm. Do you hear that? I stopped and listened. Over the sound of the rain, I could hear something else. Footsteps. Bare feet slapping against wet mud, moving at that same steady pace we'd been tracking. The footsteps were behind us. We both turned, sweeping our flashlights back along the trail. There was nothing there, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. Move, I said, fast. We started running, or as close to running as you can manage on a muddy trail in the dark. The footsteps behind us matched our pace, never getting closer but never falling behind either. Then, impossibly, we heard footsteps ahead of us too. We skidded to a stop, both of us breathing hard. Behind us, the sound of bare feet on mud approaching steadily. Ahead of us, the same sound, coming toward us. Off the trail, I said, into the trees. We plunged into the forest, leaving the trail behind. The underbrush was thick, branches whipping at our faces, roots trying to trip us. But the trees also provided cover, and we needed cover right now more than we needed an easy path. We crashed through the forest for maybe 200 yards before stopping to listen. The footsteps had stopped. Or maybe we just couldn't hear them anymore over the sound of the rain and our own heavy breathing. What the hell was that? Reed gasped. I don't know, but we need to get our bearings and find a way back to the trailhead without using the main trail. I pulled out my GPS unit. We were about 4 miles from the nearest road, with steep terrain and dense forest between us and safety. But at least we knew which direction to go. We cut cross-country, I said. Due west. It's going to be rough going, but it gets us away from whatever's on that trail. Reed nodded, still catching his breath. Do you think it was following us or hurting us? It was a good question, and one I didn't have an answer for. The footsteps had appeared both behind and ahead of us, almost as if they were trying to trap us on the trail between them. We started moving west, using the GPS to navigate through the dark forest. The rain made everything harder. We couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The ground was slippery, and every shadow looked like a person standing between the trees. We'd gone maybe half a mile when I noticed something that made me stop cold. There, in the mud, beside a small creek we were crossing, was a barefoot print. Fresh, clear. Exactly like the ones we'd been seeing on the trail. Reed, I said quietly. Look down. He saw it at the same time I did, and then we saw more. Prints on both sides of the creek. Prints leading in multiple directions. Prints that appeared and disappeared with no clear pattern. We're going back to the trail, I said. At least on the trail we know where we're going. Out here, we're lost. But the footsteps, I know. But I'd rather deal with something following us on a known path than something surrounding us in the woods where we can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. We made our way back to the trail, using the GPS to guide us. It took about 20 minutes of rough bushwhacking, but we finally hit the muddy path again. The footsteps started up again immediately. Behind us, ahead of us, sometimes to our left, sometimes to our right, but always just beyond the range of our flashlights. Bare feet on mud, steady, patient, relentless. We walked for 3 hours through that rain, listening to those footsteps pace us. Sometimes they'd get close enough that I swore I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Other times, they'd fade away almost completely, just a whisper of sound under the rain, before returning with renewed intensity. Reed kept his hand on his radio the whole time, though neither of us called in. What would we say? That we were being followed by footsteps that belonged to someone we couldn't see. That prints were appearing in impossible locations, made by someone who could apparently be in multiple places at once. It was approaching midnight when we finally saw lights ahead. The trailhead. Civilization. Our vehicle parked under a sodium lamp that looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The footsteps stopped the moment we cleared the tree line. We practically ran to the truck, both of us soaked through despite our rain gear, exhausted, and more shaken than either of us wanted to admit. I started the engine and we sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum on the roof, the heater slowly bringing warmth back into the cab. "Did that really just happen?" Reed asked. "I don't know what that was," I said, "but we documented it. We have photos, measurements, whatever it was real." We drove back to the ranger station in silence. Supervisor Hammond was waiting for us, along with 2 other rangers who'd apparently been called in. They all looked grim. "Conference room," Hammond said. "Now." We filed in and sat down. Hammond pulled up the photos we'd sent from the field on his laptop, displaying them on the conference room screen. "Before we start," he said, "I need to know if either of you consumed anything unusual today. Any medications, anything that might affect perception or judgment." "No, sir," we both said. "And you're both certain about what you saw?" 4 sets of identical barefoot prints, all converging on a single point? "Yes, sir," I said. "We documented it thoroughly. Measurements confirmed they were made by the same feet." Hammond nodded slowly. "Then I need to tell you something that's not in any official record. You're not the first rangers to report unusual barefoot prints in this section of forest." He pulled up a different file on his laptop. In 2012, 2 rangers reported finding barefoot prints that appeared to walk up a vertical cliff face. In 2015, a solo ranger found prints that formed a perfect spiral pattern around a tree, going up the trunk and disappearing into the branches. And last year, a ranger reported prints that appeared to be walking on top of a creek without breaking the surface tension. "Why isn't this documented?" Reed asked. "Because every time we send investigators, they find nothing. No prints, no evidence. It's always after a rain, and by the time anyone can get back to the site, everything's been washed away." He looked at us seriously. "But the rangers who report these incidents are always reliable, experienced people. People like you 2. "What do you think it is?" I asked. Hammond was quiet for a moment. "There are stories, local legends about someone who used to live in these woods. A hermit who supposedly died back in the 1970s. People claim to have seen him over the years, always barefoot, always walking the same trails. Some say he's looking for something he lost before he died. Others say he's warning people away from dangerous areas." "You're talking about a ghost," Reed said flatly. "I'm talking about a pattern of unexplained phenomena that's been occurring in this forest for decades. What you want to call it is up to you." I thought about those footsteps pacing us through the rain, about the prints that split and multiplied, about the way they'd stopped the moment we reached the trailhead. "Whatever it was," I said, "it didn't feel malevolent. It felt, I don't know, like it was trying to show us something, or tell us something. Did you notice where the prints converged? One of the other rangers asked. The spot where they all ended? I pulled up the GPS coordinates on my phone. Yeah, why? She pulled up a map on her own device and plotted the point. That's where Joshua Brennan's body was found in 1973. The hermit I mentioned. He died of exposure, alone in the woods. They found him curled up at the base of that oak tree. The fallen oak. The one where the prints had split and later converged. The tree's been dead for years, she continued. Lightning strike probably back in the 90s. But that's the exact spot where Brennan died. We all sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. So, what's the official stance? I asked. What goes in our report? Hammond sighed. The official stance is that you encountered unusual track formations that likely have a rational explanation we haven't identified yet. Possibly someone pranking rangers, possibly some kind of natural phenomenon we don't understand. You'll write up a detailed incident report, we'll file it, and we'll increase patrols in that area to see if we can catch whoever or whatever is making these prints. And unofficially, Reed asked. Unofficially, I'm recommending that night patrols in that section be conducted in teams of 3 or more from now on, and if you encounter those prints again, you document them but you don't follow them. You definitely don't go off trail chasing them. We filed our reports and went home. I took a hot shower, changed into dry clothes, and tried to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those prints, multiplying, converging, leading nowhere and everywhere at once. The next morning, I woke up to a call from Hammond. "We've got something you need to see," he said, his voice tight. "Get down to the station." When I arrived, Reed was already there, along with 2 rangers I didn't recognize. Transfers from other districts who'd apparently driven in overnight. Hammond had pulled up a series of photographs on the conference room screen. These were taken by Ranger Mitchell in the Cherokee National Forest in 2016, Hammond said, clicking through the images. Single set of barefoot prints that split into 3 trails, all converging on the same spot. He clicked to the next set. These are from Ranger Kowalski in the Jefferson National Forest 2014. Barefoot prints that appeared to walk in a complete circle for over a mile, never deviating, never stopping. More clicks. More photographs. Barefoot prints from different forests, different states, different years. All with the same impossible characteristics, splits, convergences, appearances in locations where no one could have walked. What you encountered wasn't isolated, Hammond said. It's been happening across the Appalachian region for decades. But here's what makes your case different. He pulled up our photographs. You're the first rangers to document prints that appeared while you were actively pursuing them. Every other case, the prints were found after the fact. One of the visiting rangers, a woman named Patricia Voss, leaned forward. I tracked similar prints for 6 hours back in 2016. Every time I thought I was getting close to whoever was making them, they'd just vanish, and then they'd appear again a mile in a different direction. She looked at me. Did you feel like they were communicating with you? Like they wanted you to understand something? I thought about those footsteps pacing us through the rain. Never attacking, never threatening, just present. Yes, I said, it felt deliberate, purposeful. That's consistent with the other reports, Voss said. Whatever's making these prints, it's not random. It's trying to tell us something. The other visiting ranger, a man named Marcus Delgado, pulled out a worn notebook. I've been tracking these incidents for 5 years, ever since I had my own encounter. I've found connections between the locations and unsolved missing person cases dating back to the 1960s. He spread out a map on the table. Red pins marked the locations where barefoot prints had been reported. Blue pins marked unsolved disappearances in those same areas. The overlap was striking. "I think these prints are markers," Delgado said. "I think they're trying to show us where people died, where bodies might still be located." Hammond was quiet for a long moment. "That's a hell of a theory, Delgado. You're saying these are, what, ghosts? Spiritual breadcrumbs?" "I'm saying that experienced rangers across multiple states are reporting identical phenomena in areas where people have vanished without explanation. And I'm saying we have a responsibility to investigate." The meeting went on for another 2 hours. We compared notes, looked at patterns, discussed theories that ranged from the scientific to the supernatural. By the end, Hammond had made a decision. "We're going to treat this as a legitimate investigative lead," he said. "Tolliver, Upchurch, you're going to work with Delgado to cross-reference the barefoot print sightings with unsolved cases in this forest. If there's a connection, we find it." Over the next week, Reed and I spent our days in the archives, going through decades of incident reports. We found 17 unsolved disappearances in our section of the forest dating back to 1965. Hikers, campers, even a few locals who'd gone into the woods and never come back out. We plotted each disappearance on a map and compared it to the barefoot print sightings. 12 of the 17 had prints reported within a quarter-mile of their last known location. That's when I started looking specifically at cases involving children. If the prints we'd followed belonged to Joshua Brennan searching for his son, maybe other prints belonged to other missing children. I found 3 cases. A 10-year-old boy who'd disappeared during a camping trip in 1967. A 12-year-old girl who'd vanished while hiking with her family in 1978. And David Brennan in 1973. Each case had barefoot prints reported in the area within the past decade. Always the same pattern, appearing impossibly, converging on specific locations, then vanishing. I brought my findings to Hammond. "I think we need to focus on these 3 cases. If the prints are trying to show us something, maybe they're trying to show us where these children ended up." He authorized limited search operations for each location. It took us 3 weeks, working weekends and using our off-duty time. We searched the area where the 1967 boy had vanished. We searched the spot where the 1978 girl was last seen. We found nothing. The forest had reclaimed whatever secrets it held in those locations. But the third search, for David Brennan, was different. That's when we found the carved message on the fallen oak. That's when I went back alone and received instructions about the cave. I didn't tell Hammond about going back alone. Didn't mention the message written in the dirt or the invisible presence I'd felt. I just told him I'd found a historical notation in the old files about cave systems in that area and thought we should check them. Sometimes you have to bend the truth to do what's right. The day we found David's remains, Delgado and Voss drove in from their districts to be there. It wasn't their jurisdiction, wasn't even their case, but they'd been tracking these phenomena long enough to feel invested. "This proves it," Voss said quietly as the forensics team worked. "The prints are connected to the missing. They're trying to bring closure. Or maybe," Reed said, "the missing are connected to the prints. Maybe the people who die out here who are lost and never found. Maybe some part of them stays, keeps looking for a way home, keeps trying to be found." That thought stayed with me. The idea that David hadn't just died in that cave, that some essence of him had remained, had somehow connected with his father's spirit, and together they'd created those impossible tracks. A father and son, both lost, both searching, until finally someone paid attention to what they were trying to communicate. The forensics team finished their work as the sun was setting. They'd recovered David's remains with all the dignity and respect a 45-year-old skeleton deserved. As they carried the remains out of the cave, I could have sworn I heard something in the wind. Not words exactly, but a sound that might have been relief or gratitude. That night, I drove back to that spot one more time, the fallen oak where it had all converged. I stood there in the darkness, and I spoke out loud, feeling foolish but compelled. "Joshua, we found him. We found David. He's going home now. You can rest." The forest was completely silent. No footsteps, no invisible presence. Just the normal sounds of night. Insects, distant owls, wind in the branches. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight caught something I hadn't noticed before. There, pressed into the soft earth beside the oak, was a single barefoot print, adult-sized. But next to it, as if someone had knelt down, were two handprints, the gesture of someone kneeling in gratitude. I photographed it, then watched as the wind began to scatter leaves across it, nature slowly erasing the last physical trace of Joshua Brennan's long search. I should have left it alone, filed the report, accepted that some things can't be explained, and moved on with my life. But I couldn't. 3 days later, on my day off, I drove back to that trailhead. It was a clear morning, no rain in the forecast, and I was going back alone to that spot where the prints had converged. I needed to see it in daylight, needed to understand what had happened. I reached the fallen oak around 10 a.m. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary. Just a dead tree that had toppled years ago, slowly rotting back into the forest floor. There was no sign of the prints. The rain had washed them all away, just like Hammond had said would happen. I walked a slow circle around the area, looking for anything unusual. That's when I noticed something I'd missed in the darkness and rain. There was writing carved into the oak's trunk, old and weathered but still legible. "Lost son, lost way, lost time, keep walking. Find me." The carving was old, probably decades old based on how the wood had healed around it, but the words sent chills down my spine. I pulled out my phone to photograph the carving, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, bare feet on the forest floor, moving through the leaves. I spun around. The forest was empty, but the footsteps continued, circling me, always just out of sight. "Joshua Brennan," I called out, feeling foolish but compelled to try. "Is that you?" The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a voice. Faint, like it was coming from a great distance, or from a very long time ago. Lost. Just that one word, barely audible, carried on a breeze that shouldn't have existed in the still morning air. I turned slowly, trying to locate the source of the voice. That's when I saw them. Barefoot prints appearing in the soft earth around me, one after another, as if someone invisible was walking in a circle around where I stood. The prints completed their circle, and then they started spiraling inward, getting closer with each revolution. I should have run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there. But I was transfixed, watching those prints appear one after another, spiraling closer and closer. They stopped about 3 feet from where I stood. And then, in the space directly in front of me, more words appeared in the soft earth, as if written by an invisible finger. "Find my son." My hands were shaking as I photographed the message. "Where?" I called out. "Where's your son?" The invisible finger wrote again. "Cave. Lost. 1973. I knew the cave systems in this area. There were dozens of them, most unexplored, many dangerous. "Which cave?" I asked. But there was no response. The presence, or whatever it was, had gone. The forest was normal again. Just me, a dead tree, and a message written in the dirt. I hiked back to my truck and spent the rest of the day in the ranger station archives, going through old incident reports from 1973. It took hours, but I finally found what I was looking for. Joshua Brennan, age 42, had been reported missing in September 1973. Search teams had found his body 3 weeks later. But what I hadn't known, what hadn't been in any of the summaries we'd been given, was that Brennan hadn't been alone when he'd entered the forest. He'd had a son with him, David Brennan, age 8. The boy had never been found. The search had focused on the area where Joshua's body was discovered, but they'd never located any sign of the child. Eventually, the official theory was that David had wandered off and died somewhere in the vast wilderness, his small body claimed by the forest. But Joshua had carved those words into the tree. Lost son, lost way, lost time. He'd been looking for his boy. Even after death, he was still looking. I brought my findings to Hammond the next day. He listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. There were several cave systems in that area, he finally said. Most of them were sealed off in the 80s after a couple of hikers got lost in them. Too dangerous. We need to check them, I said. Marvin, that was 45 years ago. If the boy went into a cave and got lost, there's nothing left to find except bones. And that's if we could even access the caves, which we can't. They're sealed. His father is still looking for him, I said. Those prints, the footsteps we heard, Joshua Brennan is still out there, still searching. Don't you think he deserves to know what happened to his son? Hammond studied me carefully. You understand how this sounds, right? You're proposing we mount a search operation based on messages allegedly written in the dirt by a ghost. I'm proposing we investigate a 45-year-old missing person case that was never properly solved. He sighed. Let me make some calls. No promises. 2 weeks later, I got approval to do a preliminary investigation of the sealed cave systems in that area. Reed volunteered to come with me, and Hammond assigned one more ranger, an experienced caver named Sandra Ortiz, to supervise the operation. We started with the largest cave system, one that had been sealed with a metal gate in 1984. The lock had rusted through years ago, and the gate swung open with a groan of corroded hinges. Stay together, Sandra said, as we prepared our equipment. No one goes off on their own. These caves are unstable, and they haven't been properly surveyed in decades. We descended into the darkness, our headlamps cutting through the gloom. The cave system was extensive, multiple passages branching off in different directions, chambers of various sizes, and several places where we had to squeeze through narrow gaps or climb down rocky drops. We'd been searching for about 3 hours when Reed called out from a side passage. I've got something. We made our way to him carefully. He was standing in a small chamber, his light focused on something against the far wall. It was a small skeleton curled up in the corner of the cave. Beside it was a rotted backpack and a flashlight that had long since corroded into uselessness. Is it him? I asked quietly. Sandra examined the remains carefully. Skeletal development is consistent with a child aged 7 to 9. We'll need proper forensic analysis to be certain, but yes, I think this is David Brennan. We marked the location and called it in. Within hours, the cave was swarming with forensics teams and investigators. They recovered the remains carefully, respectfully. DNA analysis confirmed it 2 weeks later. The skeleton was indeed David Brennan. He'd wandered into the cave system, probably looking for shelter from the weather, and had gotten lost in the darkness. He'd died alone in the dark, while his father had searched desperately for him above ground. The remains were buried next to Joshua's grave in a small cemetery near the town where they'd lived. A proper funeral, 45 years late. I went back to that spot in the forest one more time, to the fallen oak where Joshua had died, where his desperate message had been carved into the wood. The carving was gone. The words had faded away as if they'd never existed, and when I stood there in the quiet forest listening, there were no footsteps, no invisible presence. Joshua Brennan had finally found his son. I thought that would be the end of it. The mystery solved, the restless spirit finally at peace. I went back to my regular duties and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But 3 months later, in December 2018, Reed and I were assigned another night patrol. Different area, different trail, but still in the Red River Gorge section. We were about an hour into the patrol when we saw them. Barefoot prints in the snow this time, instead of mud. 2 sets, side by side. One adult-sized, one child-sized, walking together down the trail, away from civilization, deeper into the wilderness. I called out, even though I knew there would be no answer. "Joshua? David? Is that you?" The prints continued for another 100 yards, then faded away as if the people making them had simply evaporated into the cold winter air. Reed and I stood there in the snow, watching our breath cloud in the freezing air. "They're still here," he said quietly. "Even though we found the boy's body, they're still here." I thought about that for a long time, about what it meant. Were they ghosts, trapped in an endless loop of searching, even though there was nothing left to find? Or were they something else? Memories, perhaps, imprinted on the land itself? The echo of a father and son who'd once walked these woods together, now replaying forever? "Maybe they're not trapped," I said. "Maybe they're just together now. Finally together, walking the trails they used to walk before everything went wrong." Reed looked at the prints, then back at me. "You really believe that?" I didn't have a good answer. What I believed kept changing depending on the day, the mood, the way the light hit the forest. "I believe there are things in these woods we don't understand," I finally said. "I believe Joshua loved his son enough to keep searching for him even after death. And I believe that somehow, in some way we can't comprehend, they found each other again." We reported the prints, of course, documented them, photographed them. By the time anyone could get back to that spot, the snow had covered them completely. Over the next year, there were more sightings. Other rangers reported seeing the prints, always 2 sets, one adult and one child, always walking together, always disappearing without explanation. Sometimes in mud, sometimes in snow, once in the dust of a dry summer trail. The reports always came from that same general area. The section of forest where Joshua had died, where David's remains had been found. It was like they were bound to that place, walking it over and over, a father and son reunited in some way that existed outside our normal understanding of death and life. I requested my transfer in early 2020, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't reconcile what I'd experienced with the rational, evidence-based worldview I'd always maintained. Every time I went out on patrol, I'd find myself looking for those prints, listening for the sound of bare feet on earth, wondering if I'd see them again. It wasn't fear that drove me away. It was the knowledge that there were questions I'd never be able to answer, mysteries that would remain mysteries no matter how much I investigated. Some of my colleagues thought I was crazy. Others understood completely. They'd had their own experiences, seen their own unexplainable things during night patrols in remote wilderness areas. Supervisor Hammond told me on my last day that the reports had actually decreased since we'd found David's remains. It was like the desperation had gone out of the appearances. The prints still showed up occasionally, but they were calmer now, more peaceful. 2 sets of tracks, walking side by side, going nowhere in particular. "You gave him what he needed," Hammond said. Joshua spent 45 years searching. Now he can rest. They both can. Then why do the prints still appear? I asked. Maybe rest doesn't mean the same thing for them as it does for us. Maybe they're still walking those trails because that's where they're happy. Together. I think about that a lot now. About what happens to love when death intervenes. Does it end? Or does it find a way to continue? To express itself in ways we can barely perceive? I don't have answers. But I have memories. Of prints that split and converged. Of footsteps that paced me through the rain. Of a message written in the earth by an invisible hand. A father's desperate plea to find his lost child. And I have the image, burned into my mind, of two sets of prints in the snow, one large, one small, walking side by side into the winter forest, leaving no other trace of their passage except those temporary marks in the snow. I've been asked why I'm sharing this story now, 2 years after leaving the Ranger Service. The answer is simple. Because people need to know that there are things in the wilderness that can't be explained. That the rational, scientific worldview we cling to doesn't account for everything we might encounter out there. But also, because people need to know that not all unexplained phenomena are malevolent. That sometimes, the mysteries we encounter are born from love, from loss, from the unbreakable bonds between parent and child. Joshua and David Brennan walked those Kentucky forests together in life. And somehow, impossibly, they walk them together still. I saw them one last time before I left. Not their prints. I saw them. It was dawn on my last patrol, and I was hiking out alone, saying goodbye to trails I'd walked for 12 years. The sun was just starting to break through the trees, and in that golden early light I saw two figures walking ahead of me on the trail. A man and a boy, both barefoot, walking at a leisurely pace. The boy was pointing at something in the trees, and the man had his hand on the boy's shoulder, guiding him, protecting him. I stopped walking and just watched them. They didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge my presence. They just walked together, comfortable in each other's company, until they rounded a bend and disappeared from view. When I reached the bend, there was no one there, just an empty trail and the morning birdsong. But in the soft earth beside the trail, I saw them one last time. Two sets of barefoot prints, walking side by side, heading deeper into the forest where they would always be together. I didn't photograph them, I didn't measure them or document them, I just stood there for a moment, feeling something I can only describe as peace, before continuing on to the trailhead and the life that waited for me beyond these woods. Some mysteries are meant to be witnessed, not solved. Some love is strong enough to outlast death itself, and some trails lead not to destinations, but to reunions that were always meant to happen, even if it took 45 years and the dedication of rangers who were willing to believe in the impossible. If you ever hike the Red River Gorge section of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and you see barefoot prints appearing on the trail, two sets, one adult and one child, don't be afraid. Don't try to follow them. Just acknowledge them, honor them, and know that somewhere in those ancient woods, a father and son are walking together, finally at peace. That's all they ever wanted, to be together. And in some way that transcends our understanding of life and death, they are. I'm Marvin Tolliver, and this is my story. The story of the prints that split the trail, the father who never stopped searching, and the reunion that happened in a realm between the living and the dead. Some trails lead home, and sometimes home isn't a place. It's a person. Even if that person exists now only as footprints in the mud, in the snow, in the dust of a summer trail. They're still walking. They're still together. And that, I think, is all that matters.